The slap echoed louder than the holiday music, burning my cheek as my stepmother loomed over me. "You do not deserve gifts," she hissed, snatching the box from my hands. The entire room held its breath, waiting for my father to intervene, but he looked away. Then Grandma Margaret, the one everyone thought was weak, raised her head and smiled. "All right," she said softly. "Watch this." I knew then that the war had just begun. My name is Angela Sutton, and if you looked at me on that particular Christmas Eve, you would have seen a woman who appeared to have everything together. I was 32 years old, the lead architect at Aurora Line Studio, and I was wearing a dress that cost more than my first car. I stood in the corner of the living room in Redford, Colorado, watching the lights blink on the 12-foot fir tree that scraped the vaulted ceiling of my father's house. From the outside, looking in through the frosted bay windows, we must have looked like the perfect American family card, the kind you buy in bulk at the drugstore because it is safe and inoffensive. But inside, the air was so thick with tension it felt like breathing in broken glass. The heating system was humming, cranking the temperature up to 75 degrees, yet I felt a distinct chill every time my stepmother, Valerie, walked past me. She was moving through the room with the precision of a shark in a fish tank, straightening napkins that were already straight and fluffing pillows that no one had dared to touch. Valerie was beautiful in a sharp, manufactured way, her blonde hair coiffed into a helmet of perfection, wearing a red velvet gown that screamed hostess dominance. She was the architect of this evening, just as she had been the architect of my misery for the last 20 years. My father, Richard, stood by the fireplace. He held a glass of scotch with a grip so tight his knuckles were white. He was smiling, but it was a hollow, fractured thing. He refused to look at me. Every time our eyes almost met, he would find something fascinating about the mantel clock or the pattern on the rug. That was Richard Sutton for you, a man who had perfected the art of selective blindness. He knew the atmosphere in the room was poisonous, but as long as he did not acknowledge it, he could pretend we were having a Merry Christmas. I adjusted the small, velvet-wrapped box in my hands. It was not a flashy gift. Unlike the mountain of expensive electronics and designer bags piled under the tree for my half-sister, Chloe, this was modest. It was a vintage silver locket for my grandmother, Margaret. Inside, I had placed a tiny, restored photograph of my late mother, her daughter. It was a gesture of memory in a house that was desperate to forget the past. Grandma Margaret was sitting in her usual high-backed armchair in the corner. She looked smaller this year. Her hands, resting on the head of her cane, were thin and veined like parchment paper. Most of the family treated her as if she were already part of the furniture, a silent observer who was too old and too frail to understand the currents of power shifting in the room. They were wrong. As I caught her eye, she gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. It was the only warmth I had felt since walking through the front door 3 hours ago. "All right, everyone." Valerie clapped her hands, the sound sharp and demanding silence. "It is time for the gifts. Let us get this over with so we can serve the roast." She said it as if gift-giving were a chore, a box to be checked off on her list of duties. The family gathered around. There were about 15 of us in total, including aunts, uncles, and cousins who only showed up for the free food and the spectacle. They sat on the sofas, nursing their drinks, their eyes darting between Valerie and me like spectators at a tennis match waiting for the first serve. Chloe was the first to dive in. She was 22, fresh out of a college degree she had barely scraped through, and she tore into her presence with the voraciousness of a child. "Oh my God, the new phone!" she shrieked, holding up the latest model. "Thank you, Mommy, thank you, Daddy." I watched Richard wince at the price tag mentally, but he nodded. "You deserve it, sweetie," he mumbled. The pile dwindled. There were gifts for the cousins, gifts for the neighbors, gifts for the mailman. Finally, the floor under the tree was almost bare. I stepped forward, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The room went quiet. I could feel the collective intake of breath. I was the anomaly here, the daughter from the first marriage, the successful career woman who did not need their money but whose presence seemed to remind them of their own inadequacies. "This is for Grandma," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I reached out to hand the velvet box to Margaret. Before my grandmother's fingers could graze the fabric, a hand shot out and intercepted the gift. Valerie. She moved with a speed that defied her high heels. She snatched the box from my hand and tossed it carelessly onto the side table, where it landed with a dull thud among the empty wrapping paper and discarded ribbons. "No," Valerie said. The single word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. I blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" Valerie turned to face me, her blue eyes icy. She smoothed the front of her red dress, regaining her composure instantly. "We are skipping you this year, Angela. And frankly, I do not think Grandma needs any more clutter from you." "Clutter?" I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. "Valerie, that is a locket. It is a gift. What is your problem?" "My problem," Valerie said, her voice dropping to a hiss that was meant to be intimate but carried clearly across the silent room, "is your attitude. You come into this house, walking around like you own the place, judging us, looking down your nose at your sister and your father. Well, I have decided. You do not deserve to be part of this exchange." She took a step closer to me, invading my personal space. I could smell her expensive perfume, a cloying scent of gardenias that made me nauseous. "You do not deserve gifts, Angela," she enunciated every syllable, biting them off. "You do not deserve to receive them, and you certainly do not deserve the dignity of giving them in this house." I looked at my father. Richard was studying the bottom of his Scotch glass as if it contained the secrets of the universe. He was not going to save me. He never had. A wave of instinctual anger, hot and blinding, surged through me. I was not a child anymore. I was a grown woman who managed million-dollar construction budgets and led teams of 50 people. I was not going to be bullied in the living room I had helped pay to renovate. I reached out and grabbed Valerie's wrist. It was a reflexive action. Not violent, but firm. I just wanted her to stop pointing her finger in my face. "Do not speak to me like that," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And give me back my grandmother's gift." The contact seemed to electrify her. Valerie looked at my hand on her wrist, then up at my face, her expression twisting from cold disdain to white-hot rage. "Get your hands off me," she screamed. And then she swung. It was not a theatrical, movie-style slap. It was a hard, vicious strike with the palm of her hand. It connected squarely with my left cheek. The sound was sickeningly loud, a sharp crack that cut through the soft crooning of Bing Crosby coming from the stereo system. My head snapped to the side. The sting was immediate and intense, radiating from my cheekbone down to my jaw. My ear rang. For a second, I saw stars. The room went deathly silent. I slowly turned my head back to look at her. My hand went to my cheek, my fingers trembling slightly as they touched the hot, throbbing skin. Valerie stood there, chest heaving, her eyes wide. For a split second, I saw fear in them, the realization that she had crossed a line in front of witnesses. But then, she glanced at my father and saw him shrinking into the shadows, and her confidence returned. She straightened her spine, justifying the violence to herself in real time. "You pushed me," she said, her voice shaking with fake victimhood. "Everyone saw that. She grabbed me. I was defending myself." I looked around the room. My cousins were staring at their shoes. My aunt was frantically typing on her phone, probably texting someone about the drama unfolding in real time. No one moved. No one spoke. Except for Chloe. My half-sister was sitting on the floor, surrounded by her loot. She had a hand over her mouth in mock shock, but her eyes were dancing. There was a gleam of pure, unadulterated satisfaction in them. She looked like a cat that had just watched the dog get kicked. She enjoyed this. She enjoyed seeing the successful big sister brought low, humiliated in the center of the family stage. "Dad," I said. It was just one word, a final plea. Richard finally looked up. He looked at my red cheek. He looked at his wife's furious face. He cleared his throat. "Angela," he said, his voice weak and pathetic. Maybe it is best if you just go to your room. Let things cool down. You know how Valerie gets when she is stressed." I felt something break inside me. It was the last tether of loyalty I had to this man. He was blaming me. He was framing my humiliation as a result of Valerie's stress. "I am not going to my room," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I am 32 years old. Dad, I do not get sent to my room." "Then get out," Valerie shouted, emboldened by her husband's cowardice. "Get out of my house. You are ungrateful, you are selfish, and you are ruining Christmas." I stood there, the humiliation burning hotter than the slap. I felt isolated, completely alone in a room full of people who shared my blood. I was ready to turn around, to grab my coat and leave this toxic house forever. I was done. I was going to walk out into the snow and never look back. But then, a sound cut through the noise. It was the tap-tap-tap of a cane on the hardwood floor. Slowly, deliberately, the sound drew everyone's attention. We all turned. Grandma Margaret was shifting in her chair. She adjusted her shawl, her movements agonizingly slow. She did not look at Valerie. She did not look at Richard. She looked straight at me. Usually, Grandma's eyes were watery and tired, the eyes of a woman waiting for the end. But tonight, they were clear. They were sharp. They were the eyes of a woman who had survived the Great Depression, the death of a husband, and the burial of her own daughter. She let out a dry, rattling breath. "Valerie," Grandma said. Her voice was not loud, but it had a texture like grinding stones. It carried more weight than Valerie's screaming ever could. Valerie froze. "Mother Sutton, stay out of this. You do not understand what is happening." "Oh, I understand," Margaret said. She leaned forward, resting both hands on her cane. A small, cold smile touched her lips. It was not a nice smile. It was a terrifying smile. "You said she does not deserve gifts. You said she does not belong." "She doesn't," Valerie snapped. "She is disrespectful." "Right," Grandma nodded slowly. "Disrespectful." She looked around the room, making eye contact with every single person who had stayed silent. She looked at Richard, who withered under her gaze. She looked at Chloe, who stopped smirking. She looked at the cousins, who finally put their phones down. "Well," Margaret said, and she shifted her gaze back to me. "Angela, come here." I hesitated, then walked over to her. My cheek was still throbbing. I knelt beside her chair, just like I used to when I was a little girl and needed her to chase the nightmares away. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched the side of my face where Valerie had struck me. Her skin was cool and dry. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. "Yes," I whispered. "Good," she said. "Remember that pain. Do not let it go. You are going to need it for fuel." Then she looked up at Valerie, who was watching us with a mixture of annoyance and unease. "Valerie," Grandma said, her voice gaining strength, shedding the disguise of frailty she had worn for years. "You have made your position very clear. You think you run this house. You think you decide who deserves what." "I am the lady of this house," Valerie declared, crossing her arms. "Richard and I—" "Richard," Grandma interrupted, speaking my father's name like it was a dirty word. "Richard is a passenger in his own life. We all know that." She reached into the pocket of her oversized cardigan. Her hand fumbled for a moment before pulling out a pair of reading glasses. She put them on slowly, theatrically. Then she reached into the other pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was not festive. It was a plain, white legal document, folded into thirds. The room was so quiet, you could hear the wind howling outside the windows. "You slapped my granddaughter," Margaret said, her voice dropping to a register that sent a shiver down my spine. "You told her she has nothing. You humiliated her." She unfolded the paper. "Grandma, what is that?" I asked, confused. She ignored me. She kept her eyes locked on Valerie. "You wanted a show. Valerie, You wanted to make a scene on Christmas Eve?" Margaret's smile widened, but it did not reach her eyes. Her eyes remained deadly serious. "All right, enough is enough. If you say she does not deserve gifts, then everybody better get ready." She smoothed the paper out on her lap. It looked official, dense text, signatures. "Watch this," she whispered. And in that moment, seeing the blood drain from my father's face as he recognized the document, and seeing the confusion cloud Valerie's arrogance, I realized something that made my breath catch in my throat. I had spent years thinking I was protecting my grandmother, that she was the weak link I needed to shelter. I was wrong. She wasn't weak. She was just waiting. She had been sharpening her knife in the dark while we were all distracted by the lights. Margaret handed the paper to me. "Read the first line. Angela, read it out loud so everyone in this room, including the neighbors down the street, can hear you." I looked down at the paper. My hands were shaking, but as my eyes focused on the text, the shaking stopped. The words were clear. The implications were devastating. I looked up at Valerie, and for the first time that night, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like the executioner. "Go on," Grandma urged. And I began to read, to understand the sheer weight of the paper in my hand and the violence of the slap that was still burning on my cheek. "You have to understand the soil in which this poisonous family tree took root. Redford, Colorado, is the kind of town that prides itself on appearances. It is a place where neighbors judge you by the cleanliness of your gutters and the brand of your SUV. Growing up here, I learned very early that the truth was something you kept locked in the basement while you served tea and lies in the living room. My mother died when I was 7. I do not remember the funeral as much as I remember the silence that followed. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that filled our house, thick enough to choke on. My father, Richard, was not a man built for solitude or grief. He was a man who needed an audience, a cheerleader, someone to organize his life and tell him he was important. So he did not mourn for long, or perhaps he mourned in the only way he knew how, which was to replace the missing piece of his life as quickly as one might replace a broken appliance. Valerie arrived less than a year later. I remember the first time I met her. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater that looked too expensive to touch. She smelled of vanilla and ambition, to the rest of Redford. Valerie was a saint. She was the woman who stepped in to save a grieving widower and his poor motherless child. She joined the PTA. She baked cookies for the church fundraisers, and she hosted dinner parties where she laughed at all of my father's recycled jokes. But the moment the front door closed and the guests left, the warmth evaporated from her face like mist off a frozen lake. Inside the house, I was not a daughter to be loved. I was a reminder of a past she wanted to erase. I was an operational cost. "Angela, go to your room," she would say, her voice flat and bored, the moment my father left for work. "And do not come out until dinner. I have a headache." I spent my childhood trying to be invisible. I learned to walk on the edges of the staircase so the wood would not creak. I learned to make my own sandwiches and wash my own clothes by the time I was 10. I watched my father drift further and further away, seduced by Valerie's management of his life. She made him feel successful, even as his small business struggled. She made him feel powerful, even as she made every meaningful decision for him. And then came Chloe, my half-sister, the golden child who cemented Valerie's status as the true matriarch of the Sutton household. Chloe was everything I was not: loud, demanding, and indulged. The only reason I did not shatter completely was Grandma Margaret. My mother's mother lived in a small, clapboard house on the edge of town, a place that smelled of dried sage and old books. Every Friday afternoon, I would pack my backpack and wait by the door, heart pounding, until Grandma's battered station wagon pulled into the driveway. Those weekends were my salvation. Grandma Margaret did not coddle me, but she saw me. That was the difference. She did not try to buy my affection with toys or ignore me to keep the peace. She taught me how to prune rose bushes, how to fix a leaking faucet, and how to balance a checkbook. I remember one afternoon when I was 12, sitting on her back porch, crying because Valerie had thrown away a drawing I had made for my dad, calling it trash that was cluttering up the kitchen island. Grandma had handed me a glass of lemonade and sat down heavily beside me. "Stop crying, Angela," she had said, her voice stern but kind. "Tears do not fix anything. Listen to me. You are looking for water in a dry well. Valerie, and frankly, your father right now. They do not have what you are looking for. They do not have kindness to give you. If you keep expecting them to change, you are the one being foolish." "That is not fair," I had sobbed. "No, it is not," she agreed. "But it is reality. Do not rely on the kindness of the wrong people. Build your own house, Angela. Make it strong. Make it yours. That way, no one can ever lock you out." I took that advice into my bones. I turned my grief and my anger into fuel. I studied harder than anyone else in my grade. I obsessed over grades, over extracurriculars, over anything that would be my ticket out of that house. When I was 18, I left Redford for architecture school in Chicago, and I did not look back. For 10 years, I breathed free air. I built a life. I became a lead architect at Aurora Line Studio. I designed commercial spaces, libraries, and homes for people who actually loved each other. I made good money, very good money. I bought my own clothes, paid my own rent, and for a long time, I thought I had escaped the gravitational pull of the Sutton family drama. But guilt is a powerful tether, and love for a grandparent is a heavy anchor. 3 years ago, Grandma Margaret took a bad fall. Her hip shattered, and her recovery was slow. The doctors said she could not live alone in that old house anymore, at least not without help. Valerie immediately suggested putting her in a state-run facility, one of those places that smelled of bleach and despair. I could not let that happen. So, I made the decision that changed everything. I transferred to the Denver branch of my firm so I could be closer to Redford. I moved back into my father's house, temporarily. I told myself, to help care for Grandma and manage her transition. That was the mistake. Moving back in as an adult was a surreal nightmare. The house had not changed, but the dynamics had calcified into something even uglier. Valerie was no longer just the wicked stepmother. She was the gatekeeper, and I was the intruder. "It is so nice of you to visit," Valerie would say, even though I had been living in the guest room for 6 months. "But you know, Angela, at your age, most women are married. Most women have their own homes. It is a little embarrassing for your father to have his 30-something daughter crashing in the spare room." She knew exactly where to stick the knife. She framed my presence as a failure, conveniently ignoring the fact that I was the one driving Grandma to her physical therapy appointments 3 times a week. I was the one cooking dinner on the nights Valerie was too exhausted from her shopping trips. And then, the financial bleeding started. It began with small things. "Oh, Angela," Valerie would say, staring at a bill on the counter. "The heating bill is astronomical this month. Since you are staying here and using the hot water, maybe you could handle this one? Just to help your father. You know business has been slow." I paid it, $300. It felt petty to argue. Then it was the groceries. "We are out of steaks. Could you run to the store? Get the good kind. Chloe is bringing a friend over." $400. Then the requests became demands disguised as emergencies. Last October, a storm damaged the roof. Water was leaking into the master bedroom. My father sat at the dining table, head in his hands, looking gray and defeated. "I do not know how we are going to pay for this," he mumbled. "The insurance deductible is too high. We might have to take out a loan." Valerie looked at me. She did not ask. She just looked at me with that expectant, entitled gaze. "Angela makes plenty of money," she said to the air. "She is a big city architect, after all, and she lives here rent-free." I paid for the roof, $12,000. I wrote the check directly to the contractor because I could not stand to see my father look so pathetic. 6 months later, the HVAC system died. $7,000. I paid that too. Then the property taxes came due, $4,500. My father claimed he was liquidating some assets, and just needed a bridge loan. I paid it. I told myself I was doing it for the house. This house that was supposed to be my inheritance one day. This house where I had memories of my mother. I told myself I was doing it so Grandma would have a warm place to stay when she visited. But deep down, I knew I was buying my right to exist in that space. I was paying a premium for a family membership that I did not even want. Meanwhile, I watched Chloe live a life of unmitigated luxury. Chloe, who had dropped out of 2 different colleges, drove a brand new Jeep Wrangler that cost nearly $50,000. Daddy bought it for me as a graduation present, she had chirped, even though she had not actually graduated. She had just completed a 6-week certificate in social media management. I watched packages arrive from Nordstrom and Sephora almost daily. Chloe wore Gucci belts and carried Louis Vuitton bags. When I asked my father how he could afford a new car for Chloe when he could not afford to fix his own roof, he just shrugged, his eyes sliding away from mine. We have to support her dreams. Angela, she is just starting out. You are established. You can handle yourself. I can handle myself, I had repeated, the bitterness coating my tongue like ash. So that means I get to pay for the necessities while she gets the toys? You are being selfish, Valerie had interjected, walking into the room with a glass of wine. You count every penny, don't you? It is so unattractive. Family helps family. Why are you always keeping score? Keeping score. That was rich coming from a woman who tracked every calorie I ate and every minute I spent in the shower. I swallowed my anger. I focused on Grandma. I spent my evenings in the small in-law suite we had set up for her on the ground floor, reading to her, talking to her. Just a little longer, I would tell myself. Once Grandma is stable, I will buy my own place in town and get out of here. But in the months leading up to this Christmas, the atmosphere in the house had shifted from hostile to conspiratorial. It started with the mail. I am meticulous about my paperwork. As an architect, I live by details. But I noticed that certain letters were not arriving. A renewed credit card I had ordered never showed up. The annual statement from my retirement fund was missing. When I asked Valerie, she waved a manicured hand. The mailman is terrible lately. Probably delivered it to the neighbors. Then there were the silences. I would walk into the kitchen, and Valerie and my father would be huddled over the island, speaking in low, urgent tones. The moment they heard my footsteps, they would stop. Valerie would loudly start talking about the weather or a recipe, her smile too bright, too sudden. My father would look guilty, shuffling papers into a drawer and closing it a little too quickly. Is everything okay? I asked one evening in November. Fine, Valerie practically shouted. Everything is wonderful. Why do you always assume something is wrong? You project so much negativity. Angela. But the feeling in my gut was undeniable. It was the instinct of an animal sensing a trap. I noticed my father looked older, more haggard. He was drinking more scotch than usual. He jumped when the phone rang. And Valerie? Valerie was practically vibrating with a manic energy. She was planning this Christmas party with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She bought new furniture. She hired a caterer. She bought that 12-foot tree. We are celebrating a new chapter, she had told the neighbors. Big things are happening for the Suttons. I did not know what big things she meant, but I knew I was not included in them. I felt like a ghost in the hallway, watching the living people plot something I could not quite hear. 2 weeks ago, I found an envelope in the recycling bin. It was from a local bank, Oak Ridge Mutual. It was addressed to my father, but it had been torn open and then discarded. I smoothed it out. It was just a flyer for home equity loans, generic junk mail. But on the back, someone had scribbled numbers in my father's shaky handwriting. 300,000, 400,000, interest rate 6.5%. I had frowned, looking at the numbers. The house was worth maybe $550,000 in this market. If they were looking to pull that much equity out, they were practically mortgaging the entire property, but that did not make sense. My father had always prided himself on having paid off the mortgage years ago. Why would he go into massive debt now, at 60 years old? I tried to bring it up. Dad, are you thinking about doing some investing? I saw some notes. He had snapped at me. Actually snapped. Stay out of my office. Angela, my finances are none of your business. You think because you pay for a roof repair you own me? His reaction was so disproportionate that it set off alarm bells in my head. He was scared. He was cornered. And Valerie was the one whispering in his ear. I started to pay closer attention. I noticed the way Valerie looked at the house, not like a home, but like a commodity. She talked about market values and liquidity on the phone with her friends. And she looked at me not just with hatred, but with a strange, smug anticipation. It was the look of someone who knows a secret that is going to destroy you, and they can barely wait to tell it. I thought I was paranoid. I thought maybe the stress of work and caring for Grandma was getting to me. I told myself to just get through Christmas, just get through the holidays, smile for the photos, hand over the gifts, and then make my exit plan. But as I stood there on Christmas Eve, watching Valerie snatch the gift meant for my grandmother, watching her strike me across the face, the puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind. The missing mail, the secret meetings, the sudden spending on the party, the way they looked at me, like I was a resource they had finished mining and were now ready to discard. They thought I was weak. They thought I was just the dutiful daughter who would pay the bills and keep her mouth shut. They thought that because I yearned for a family, I would tolerate any abuse just to stay at the table. But as I looked down at the paper Grandma Margaret had just handed me, I realized they had made a fatal miscalculation. They forgot who raised me on those weekends. They forgot that I was an architect. I knew how to look at a structure and find the structural failure. I knew how to find the cracks. And looking at the document in my hands, I saw the biggest crack of all. "Read it," Grandma whispered again, nudging my arm. I took a breath, the air in the room tasting of pine needles and betrayal, and I prepared to burn their perfect little world to the ground. The first crack in the facade did not appear with a scream or a crash. It arrived silently, glowing on the screen of my smartphone at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk at Aurora Line Studio, reviewing the blueprints for a new municipal library in downtown Denver. My mind was occupied with load-bearing walls and fire exits, a world of logic and safety. When my phone buzzed, I glanced at it expecting a message from a contractor or perhaps a reminder about Grandma Margaret's prescription refill. Instead, it was an email notification. Subject: regarding your recent inquiry, Oak Ridge Mutual Bank. I frowned. I did not bank with Oak Ridge Mutual. My accounts were with a national chain, and I had not made any inquiries about anything financial in months. I swiped the notification open, assuming it was a phishing scam, one of those generic blasts sent out to thousands of people hoping to catch a fool. But the body of the email was specific. "Dear Ms. Sutton, thank you for updating your contact information regarding the mortgage application currently in underwriting. We have noted the change of email address. Your loan officer will be in touch regarding the appraisal scheduled for next week." I froze. My hand hovered over the delete button, but I did not press it. My eyes scanned the text again. Ms. Sutton, mortgage application, appraisal. I did not have a mortgage. I rented a small apartment in Denver that I barely used anymore, and I was living in my father's house in Redford, which he owned outright, or so I had been told for the last 20 years. My father had paid off the house shortly after he married Valerie, using a chunk of life insurance money from my mother's passing. He bragged about it constantly. "Free and clear," he would say. "No man owns the roof over my head." So why was a local bank emailing me about a mortgage application? I typed a quick reply. "I think you have the wrong person. I did not apply for a loan." The response came back 10 minutes later. "Our records indicate this is Angela Sutton, date of birth, June 12, 1993. If this is an error, please visit our branch immediately." The air in my office suddenly felt very thin. June 12th, my birthday. That evening, the drive back to Redford felt longer than usual. The mountains loomed like jagged teeth against the twilight sky. When I walked into the house, the smell of roasted chicken filled the air, a domestic perfection that made my stomach churn. Valerie was in the kitchen, tossing a salad. My father was sitting at the island, nursing a beer. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. I put my keys on the counter. "Dad, I got a weird email today from Oak Ridge Mutual." My father's hand jerked slightly. A splash of beer sloshed onto his knuckles. He wiped it away quickly, keeping his eyes on the bottle. "Oak Ridge? I do not know what you are talking about." "They said something about a mortgage application," I said, watching him closely. "Under my name." Valerie laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound, like ice hitting glass. "Oh, Angela, honestly, you know how technology is these days. It is probably just a glitch. Spam. I get emails saying I have won the lottery 3 times a week." "They had my birth date," I said, looking at Valerie, "and they mentioned an appraisal." "It is a small town," Valerie said, dismissing me with a wave of her salad tongs. "Probably a teller typed in the wrong social security number or mixed up a file. There are other Suttons in the county. Do not make a drama out of a clerical error. You are always so serious." She placed a bowl of salad in front of my father. "Eat up, Richard. You look pale." My father took a large bite of lettuce, chewing aggressively to avoid speaking. "Valerie is right," he mumbled through a mouthful of food. "Just ignore it. If it was real, they would have called." I wanted to press him. I wanted to ask why his hand had shaken, but the wall was up. The Valerie and Richard united front. If I pushed now, I would be the hysterical daughter ruining dinner. So I let it go. But I did not ignore it. 2 days later, on a Thursday, I came home early. I had a headache and had decided to finish my work from the guest room. I parked my car down the street so I would not block the driveway for the cleaners, so neither Valerie nor my father heard me enter the house. I walked softly into the hallway, heading for the stairs, when I heard voices drifting from the kitchen. They were low, urgent, lacking the performative cheerfulness they usually wore when I was in the room. "Deadline is the 31st. Richard, we cannot push it back." Valerie's voice was sharp, like a whip crack. I know. My father sounded exhausted. "But the appraisal? What if she is here when they come?" "She is at work," Valerie snapped. "We schedule it for midday. Stop being such a coward. The refinancing is the only way. Do you want to lose the club membership? Do you want Chloe to have to drop out of that program? We need that first disbursement by January 1st. I stood frozen in the hallway, my back pressed against the wall. Refinancing. First disbursement. January 1st. My heart hammered against my ribs. Refinancing meant taking a loan out against the value of the house. But why were they worried about me being there? If it was my father's house, he could mortgage it to the hilt if he wanted to. It was his property. He could burn it down if he felt like it. Why the secrecy? Why the fear? Unless it wasn't just his house, or unless the loan wasn't just in his name. The pieces of the puzzle began to itch at the back of my mind, irritating and persistent. I went upstairs silently, my headache forgotten, replaced by a cold knot of dread. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. It was property tax season. Usually, the tax bill from City Hall arrived in early November. I paid it every year, one of the many contributions Valerie insisted I make. I realized I had not seen the bill. It was now mid-December. I opened my work email and composed a message to the clerk at the City Hall Records office. I had worked with her on a zoning permit for a client a few months ago. "Hi, Sarah. Quick question. Did the tax bill for the Sutton residence on Maple Drive go out yet? I haven't received it." The reply came 20 minutes later. "Hey, Angela. Yes, we mailed that out 4 weeks ago. It was sent to the home address. Status shows it hasn't been paid yet. Do you want me to email you a PDF copy?" 4 weeks ago. I stared at the screen. The mail came through a slot in the front door. It landed in a basket that Valerie checked every day. She had intercepted the tax bill. She had hidden it. Why hide a bill you want someone else to pay? Because you do not want them to see what is written on it. I asked Sarah to send the PDF. When I opened it, everything looked standard at first glance. The amount was there, $4,200, but then I looked at the owner information field. Usually, It listed Richard Sutton. This year, the field read, Richard Sutton, Estate of M. Sutton, Trust. I frowned. M. Sutton. That could be my mother. Maria or Margaret? My father had never mentioned a trust. He had always said the deed was in his name solely. The next day, I took Grandma Margaret to her cardiologist appointment. The waiting room was quiet, smelling of antiseptic and old magazines. Grandma was having a good day. Her mind was sharp, her eyes alert. I held her hand, feeling the thin bones beneath the paper-dry skin. Grandma, I said softly, leaning in close so the receptionist wouldn't hear. Dad is acting strange about the house. Margaret didn't look surprised. She stared straight ahead at a poster about blood pressure. Your father has been acting strange since the day he met that woman, she said. No, this is different, I insisted. I think they are taking out a loan, a big one, and I think they might be using my name. Margaret's grip on my hand tightened. It was a surprising strength, fierce and protective. She turned her head slowly to look at me. Angela, she said, her voice low and gravelly, listen to me very carefully. Do not sign anything, nothing. If they put a piece of paper in front of you, even if it is a birthday card, you check it. If it is legal, you read it 3 times, and then you take it to a lawyer. Why? I asked. Grandma, what do you know? I know that desperation makes people do ugly things, she said enigmatically, and Valerie has expensive tastes and a husband who hasn't made a real commission in 2 years. They are drowning. Angela. And a drowning man will climb on top of his own daughter to breathe. She patted my hand, her face setting into a hard mask. You verify everything. Do not trust them. That night, locked in my room with a chair wedged under the doorknob, I did the one thing I had been too afraid to do. I went to a credit monitoring website. I entered my social security number, my previous addresses, and answered the security questions. The report generated in seconds, a spinning wheel turning into a long list of data. I scrolled past my student loans, paid off, my car lease, paid off, my credit cards, low balances, and then, under the section labeled Hard Inquiries, there it was. Oak Ridge Mutual Bank. Date, November 15th. Purpose, real estate mortgage. The room seemed to spin. A hard inquiry meant someone had given the bank permission to check my credit history. To do that, they needed my social security number and my signature on a consent form. I had never given either. I sat back in my chair, feeling bile rise in my throat. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a clerical error by a confused teller. This was identity theft, and it was being committed by the people sleeping down the hall. I printed the report. The sound of the printer whirring felt deafening in the silent house. I grabbed the paper, marched downstairs, and found them in the living room. They were watching a holiday baking show, the glow of the television illuminating their relaxed faces. I threw the paper on the coffee table. It landed on top of a bowl of popcorn. You ran a credit check on me, I said. My voice was shaking, not with fear, but with a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. Richard jumped. Valerie sighed, pausing the TV with an exaggerated slowness. Angela, Valerie said, her tone dripping with condescension. Must you always storm in here like a tempest? We are trying to relax. Look at the paper. Valerie, I pointed. Oak Ridge Mutual, November 15th. You used my social security number. Richard wouldn't look at the paper. He stared at his socks. Valerie picked it up, glanced at it, and shrugged. We are looking into some financial restructuring for the family estate. Since you are living here, and since you will eventually inherit things, the broker needed to see the full picture of the family's creditworthiness. It is standard procedure. It is not standard procedure to forge my signature on a consent form, I yelled. That is fraud. Valerie, federal fraud. Oh, stop using big words to scare your father, Valerie snapped, dropping the paper back on the table. You are being oversensitive. We are doing this for you, you ungrateful girl. We are trying to secure assets so that when we are gone, you and Chloe have something. But no, you have to turn everything into a crime scene. I did not give permission, I said, my voice dropping. Cancel it. Whatever application you have running, cancel it, or I will call the bank myself. Valerie stood up. She was shorter than me, but in that moment, she seemed to loom. You will do no such thing. You will not embarrass this family in front of the town. You live under my roof. Angela, you eat my food, you use my heat. If we need to leverage your credit score, which is excellent. By the way, thanks to the education your father paid for, to help the family survive a rough patch, then that is the least you can do. I paid for my own education, I corrected her. Through scholarships and 3 jobs, Dad didn't pay a dime. Details, Valerie hissed. The point is, we are a family. Families share burdens. Why are you so selfish? Why is it always me with you? She was twisting it. She was taking a crime and turning it into a test of my loyalty. It was masterfully manipulative. I looked at my father. Dad, are you okay with this? You are okay with forging my name? Richard took a deep breath. Angela, it is just a bridge loan. Just until the spring. Business will pick up. We need the liquidity. Please, do not make a fuss. I looked at him. A broken man, hiding behind his wife's skirts, willing to sell his daughter's financial future to keep up appearances. I am not signing anything, I said clearly. And if I see one more inquiry, I am going to the police. Go to bed, Angela, Valerie said dismissively, turning the TV back on. You are tired and you are talking nonsense. I went back to my room, but I did not go to bed. I pulled out a fresh notebook. I sat at my desk and opened a new file on my computer. Password protected. Entry 1. December 14th. Incident. Discovered unauthorized hard credit inquiry from Oak Ridge Mutual. Evidence. Credit report printed. Email from bank regarding mortgage application. Witnesses. Richard and Valerie Sutton admitted to knowledge of the inquiry. I wrote down everything, the dates of the missing mail, the conversation I overheard in the kitchen, the tax bill discrepancy. My hands were steady now. The shock had burned off, leaving behind a clear, sharp clarity. This wasn't just a family dysfunction anymore. This wasn't just a stepmother being mean. This was a calculated financial maneuver. They were trying to saddle me with a debt I didn't ask for, secured by a house they might not even fully own, to fund a lifestyle they couldn't afford. If I let this happen, if I let that loan close on December 31st, I would be on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when they inevitably defaulted, because they would default, the bank would take the house. I looked around the room. I had painted these walls. I had paid for the insulation behind them. I had fixed the window frame when it rotted. They are not just trying to steal my credit, I whispered to the empty room. They are trying to steal my home. I closed the notebook. I wasn't the daughter anymore. I was the architect. And I had just discovered a massive structural flaw in the foundation of the Sutton family. It was time to stop patching the cracks and start looking for the demolition crew. I needed help. I needed someone who understood the law better than I did. I needed to talk to Grandma's friend. I needed to talk to a lawyer. The drive to the Oak Creek Care Center took 20 minutes, winding through roads lined with snow-heavy pines that looked nothing like the artificial, manicured decorations back at the Sutton house. Here, the silence was real. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after I had discovered the credit inquiry, and the sky was a flat, bruised gray, promising a heavy storm by nightfall. I walked into the facility, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft hiss. The air inside smelled of lavender sanitizer and chamomile tea, a stark contrast to the cloying scent of Valerie's expensive vanilla candles. It was peaceful here, but it was the peace of a waiting room, suspended between life and whatever came next. I found Grandma Margaret in her room at the end of the hall. She was sitting in her wheelchair by the window, looking out at the bird feeder she had insisted we hang up. She wore a knitted cardigan that was slightly too big for her shrinking frame. When I entered, she did not turn immediately, but I saw her reflection in the glass. She was not looking at the birds. She was looking at the reflection of the door, waiting for me. "You look like you are carrying a bag of rocks. Angela," she said, her voice raspy but steady. She turned the wheelchair around slowly. "Close the door." I did as she asked, the latch clicking shut with a finality that made the room feel like a confession booth. I sat on the edge of the bed, facing her. "I found something, Grandma," I started, my voice tight. "A credit check. They are trying to take out a loan in my name." Margaret did not gasp. She did not look shocked. Instead, a shadow of profound sadness crossed her face, deepening the lines around her mouth. She sighed, a long, rattling exhalation that sounded like leaves scraping across pavement. "So it has started," she whispered. "I hoped we had more time. I hoped Richard would find a shred of backbone before it came to this." She wheeled herself over to the small dresser next to her bed. Her hands, usually shaky with tremors, moved with a surprising purpose. She pulled open the bottom drawer, pushing aside stacks of wool socks and folded nightgowns until she reached the very back. She pulled out a box. It was an old metal biscuit tin, the kind with a faded picture of the Queen on the lid, rusted at the corners. It clattered softly as she placed it on her lap. "I have kept this box for 20 years, she said, her fingers tracing the rim. "Your grandfather and we argued about this. He wanted to tell you when you turned 18. I said no. I said, let the girl have a father for a little longer. Let her believe he is taking care of her." She looked up at me, her eyes wet. "I was wrong. I let you live a lie because I was too cowardly to break your heart." "What is it?" I asked. "Open it." I took the cold metal box. The lid was stiff, resisting my pull for a moment before popping open with a snap. Inside, there was no money, no jewelry, just a stack of papers, yellowed at the edges, bound together with a thick rubber band. I unfolded the document on top. It was a copy of a last will and testament. The names at the top were my grandfather's and grandmother's. I scanned the legal jargon, my eyes skipping over the standard clauses about burial arrangements and small bequests to charities. Then I stopped. Article 4, Real Property. I read the paragraph. I read it again. Then I read it a third time, my lips moving silently as my brain tried to process the words that rewrote my entire history. Regarding the property located at 42 Maple Drive, Redford, Colorado, currently serving as the primary residence of our daughter Maria and her husband Richard Sutton, upon the death of the survivor of the grantors, or upon the death of our daughter Maria, the title to said property shall transfer immediately into the Sutton Family Trust, the sole beneficiary of which is our granddaughter, Angela Sutton. I looked up at Margaret, my hands trembling. "Grandma, this says, the house." "The house is yours," Margaret said firmly. "It has been yours since the day your mother died." I shook my head, trying to make the math work. "But Dad says he paid off the mortgage. He says it is his house. He acts like I am a guest. Valerie acts like she owns every square inch." "Richard has a life estate interest," Margaret explained, her voice gaining strength. "That means he is allowed to live there until he dies. But he does not own the deed. He cannot sell it. And most importantly, Angela, he cannot mortgage it." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "Your grandfather never liked Richard. He thought Richard was charming but weak, a man who would bend with the wind. And when Valerie showed up, we saw her coming from a mile away. We knew that if Richard owned that house, Valerie would bleed it dry within a decade. So we bypassed him. We left it to you, in a trust, so that you would always have a roof over your head." "Does he know?" I asked. "He knows," Margaret scoffed. "He is the trustee. He was supposed to transfer the title formally when you turned 25. But he never mentioned it. Did he? He just let you move out, let you pay rent in the city, let you come back and pay for his roof repairs, all while pretending he was the gracious host." I felt sick. The betrayal was physical, a punch to the gut. All those times Valerie had told me I was living off their kindness. All those times my father had looked at the ceiling when I asked about finances. They weren't just mooching off me. They were gaslighting me in my own property. But why now? I asked. If they have kept this secret for so long, why risk the fraud now? Because they are desperate, Margaret said, and because Valerie is getting greedy. She reached out and took the papers back from me, smoothing them out with a protective tenderness. Valerie came to see me last week, Tuesday. I think she brought me a poinsettia plant. She hates flowers, so I knew she wanted something. My stomach tightened. What did she say? She was very chatty, Margaret said, narrowing her eyes. She asked about my health, asked if I had all my affairs in order, and then she started asking hypothetical questions. She asked, Margaret, if Richard wanted to transfer the house to Chloe one day, what would be the best way to handle the taxes? I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. She wants to give my house to Chloe. She thinks it is Richard's house, Margaret corrected. Or she suspects it isn't, and she was fishing to see if I was senile enough to sign something over. I played the confused old lady. I told her I didn't remember much about paperwork anymore, but I saw her eyes. Angela. She was calculating. She left here thinking I was out of the game. That is why the tax bills disappeared, I said, the realization hitting me like a lightning bolt. The tax bills. I saw the PDF yesterday. It listed Estate of M. Sutton as the owner. Valerie must have been intercepting them for years so I wouldn't see that name. If I saw the bill, I would know the house wasn't Richard's. Exactly, Margaret nodded. And the bank? I stood up and paced the small room, my mind racing. The bank thinks I am the owner. That is why they emailed me. But Richard and Valerie are trying to take out a loan. They can't use the house as collateral if they don't own it. So they must be… I stopped, staring at the wall. They are pretending to be you. Margaret finished the sentence for me. Or they are forging your signature to make it look like you. The owner are co-signing a loan for them. That is the only way a bank would touch that property. I leaned against the windowsill, looking out at the gray sky. It was so much worse than I had thought. It wasn't just about money, it was about erasure. They were willing to erase my identity, my rights, and my future just to keep their facade of wealth intact. They were going to drain the equity out of my inheritance, the one thing my mother had left me, and spend it on Chloe's cars and Valerie's vacations. And when the money ran out and the bank came to foreclose, it would be my name on the eviction notice. I have to stop them, I said. I have to go home and confront them right now. No, Margaret said sharp. Sit down. I turned back to her. Grandma, I can't just… You sit down, she commanded. You do not go into a war zone with a slingshot. Angela, you go with a tank. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small, white business card. She held it out to me. Take this. I took the card. It was simple. Heavy cardstock. Dana Ruiz, attorney at law, estate planning and litigation. Dana is an old friend of mine, Margaret said. She was the junior lawyer who helped your grandfather draft this trust 30 years ago. She knows everything. I called her the day Valerie visited me. She is expecting your call. I looked at the card, then at my grandmother. The frailty was gone from her face. In its place was a steely resolve that reminded me of the iron support beams I used in my skyscrapers. You knew, I whispered. You knew this was coming. I hoped I was wrong, Margaret said softly. But I prepared for the day I would be right. Valerie thinks she is playing chess with a toddler. She does not realize she is sitting across from the woman who taught her husband how to tie his shoes. Margaret beckoned me closer. I knelt by her wheelchair, and she took my face in her hands. Her palms were warm now. Listen to me, Angela. This is the most important thing I will ever tell you. You are going to go back to that house. You are going to smile. You are going to eat their food. You are going to let them think they have won. You are going to let them think you are the same quiet, obedient girl they have walked over for 20 years. Why? I asked, tears stinging my eyes. I want to scream at them. Because we need them to feel safe, she said. We need them to be so confident that they make a mistake. We need them to put the papers on the table. And when they do… She paused. her thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped my eye. When they do, we will be ready. Dana told me she can file an emergency injunction to stop any bank transaction, but she needs proof. She needs the physical documents they are trying to use. You need to get your hands on whatever they are hiding in Richard's office. I can do that, I said, my voice hardening. I know where he keeps the key. Good, Margaret said. But there is one more thing. Her expression darkened, and her grip on my face tightened slightly. Valerie is a cornered animal, and Richard is a weak man, and weak men are dangerous because they panic. If you confront them, if you push them, they might lash out, not just with words. I thought of the way Valerie had looked at me in the kitchen, the sheer venom in her eyes. I thought of the way she slammed cupboards. If they dare to touch you, Margaret said, measuring every word, if they dare to raise a hand to you, Angela, do not just take it, do not cry. You make sure there are witnesses. You make sure it is recorded. Because if they cross that line, we do not just take the house back, we take everything. They won't hit me, I said, trying to convince myself. Dad wouldn't let her. Your father let her erase your mother from that house, Margaret said bitterly. Do not overestimate him. She released me and leaned back in her chair, looking exhausted but satisfied. Go call Dana. Tell her Margaret sent you. Tell her the code word is blue spruce. She will know what to do. Blue spruce? I asked. The tree in the backyard, Margaret smiled faintly. The one your grandfather planted the day you were born. The one Valerie has been trying to cut down for 5 years because it blocks her view of the golf course. That tree is still standing. Angela. And so are you. I stood up, clutching the metal box to my chest like a shield. I felt different. When I had walked into this room, I was a victim of identity theft, a confused daughter trying to understand why her family hated her. Now, I was the owner of the battlefield. Thank you, Grandma, I said. Don't thank me yet, she said, closing her eyes. Thank me when you hand me the deed with your name on it. Now go. And Angela? Yes? Check the recording laws in Colorado, she murmured, her eyes still closed. It is a one-party consent state. As long as you are part of the conversation, you can record it without telling them. Remember that. I stared at her for a moment, in awe of this old woman who spent her days watching birds and her nights plotting legal warfare. I will, I said. I left the room, the metal box heavy in my arms, the business card burning a hole in my pocket. The hallway seemed brighter now, sharper. I walked out to my car, the cold wind hitting my face, but I didn't feel the chill. I felt a fire lighting up in my chest. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at the phone number on the card. I didn't wait. I dialed. Law Office of Dana Ruiz. A professional voice answered on the second ring. Hi, I said, my voice steady and clear. My name is Angela Sutton. Margaret sent me. I need to speak to Dana about a blue spruce. There was a pause on the other end, and then the tone shifted instantly. Hold for Ms. Ruiz immediately. Ms. Sutton, we have been waiting for you. I started the engine. The drive back to Redford would be different this time. I wasn't going home to a place where I didn't belong. I was going home to inspect my property. And if Valerie and Richard thought they could steal it from me, they were about to learn that the hardest wood in the forest doesn't break. It hits back. The storm that Margaret had warned me about was coming, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the thunder. I was the one bringing the lightning. The coffee shop Dana Ruiz had chosen was called the Gray Quill, a dimly lit place in downtown Denver tucked between a law firm and a bookstore. It was quiet, the kind of place where people spoke in hushed tones about divorces and mergers. I sat in a booth at the back, my hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee that had gone cold 10 minutes ago. Across from me, Dana Ruiz read the documents from Grandma's metal box. Dana was striking. She had silver hair cut into a sharp bob and wore a suit that looked like armor. She didn't read like a normal person. Her eyes scanned the pages with terrifying speed, absorbing clauses and statutes faster than I could sip my drink. She was silent for a long time, the only sound the rustle of the yellowed paper. Finally, she looked up. She took off her reading glasses and tapped the document with a manicured nail. "If this will is authentic," Dana said, her voice low and precise, "then your father and stepmother are not just lying to you. Angela, they are walking a tightrope over a pit of felonies." "Grandma said the house is mine," I said, leaning forward. "It is," Dana confirmed. "Technically, the house belongs to the Sutton Family Trust. You are the sole beneficiary. Your father has what we call a life estate. He has the right to live there, to sleep there, to watch television in the living room, but he does not have the right to sell it, and he certainly does not have the right to encumber it with debt. He cannot mortgage a property he does not own." "But the bank," I stammered, thinking of the credit inquiry. "Oak Ridge Mutual sent me an email. They think I applied for the loan." Dana's eyes narrowed. "Exactly. Because Richard knows he cannot get a loan on his own. The title search would show the trust is the owner. So, to get the money, they have to make the bank believe that the trustee, your father, and the beneficiary, you, are acting together. They need your consent. They need your signature." She sat back, crossing her arms. "Angela, we need to see what they gave the bank. We need the file." "They won't give it to me," I said. "Valerie hides the mail." "Not from Valerie," Dana said. "From the bank. You are the applicant, remember? Or at least, the bank thinks you are. You have every right under the Fair Credit Reporting Act to demand the documentation for a loan application submitted in your name. Go to Oak Ridge Mutual. Walk in there today. Tell them you suspect identity theft, and you want to see the file immediately. Do not ask. Demand." I left the coffee shop with my heart hammering against my ribs. I drove straight to the Redford branch of Oak Ridge Mutual. It was a small building with faux marble columns, trying to look important. I walked inside, smoothing down my blazer, channeling every ounce of professional authority I used when commanding a construction site. I sat down at the desk of a loan officer, a young man named Kevin who looked like he had just graduated from college. "I am Angela Sutton," I said, placing my driver's license on his desk. "I received a notification about a mortgage application on the property at 42 Maple Drive. I did not initiate this application. I want to see the paperwork right now." Kevin looked nervous. He typed something into his computer, frowned, and typed again. "Ms. Sutton, yes, the application is in final underwriting. The appraisal was ordered last week. It says here everything is signed, and the closing is scheduled for December 28th. "Print it," I said. My voice was ice. "Print the application and the promissory note." I am not sure if I can just—" "I am the applicant, Kevin." I interrupted him. "And I am telling you that I have never set foot in this bank before today. If you do not give me those papers, my next conversation will be with the federal banking regulators. Print the file." He printed it. He handed me a thick stack of warm paper. I took it to a chair in the corner of the lobby, away from the prying eyes of the tellers. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the pages. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and turned the cover page. It was a standard application for a second mortgage, a home equity line of credit. Amount requested, $450,000. Purpose, home improvement, debt consolidation. Applicants, Richard Sutton and Angela Sutton. I felt the blood drain from my face. $450,000. They were stripping almost every cent of equity out of the house. If this loan went through, the house would be worthless to me. It would be nothing but a container for debt. I flipped to the signature page, and there it was. Angela Sutton. I stared at the name written in blue ink at the bottom of the page. It was my name. It was spelled correctly, but it was not my signature. I am an architect. I draw for a living. My handwriting is precise, capitalized, and architectural. My signature is sharp, angular, a quick series of distinct lines. The signature on the paper was loopy. It was soft. The capital S in Sutton had a big, round belly at the bottom, curling up like a pig's tail. I never wrote an S like that. I had never written an S like that in my life. And the slant was wrong. It leaned too far to the left. The mark of someone who was trying too hard to make it look formal. I looked at the date next to the signature. December 12th, 2025. My breath hitched. On December 12th, I had been in Denver all day. I had been at a site inspection from 8 in the morning until 6 at night. I had credit card receipts from a lunch spot in the city to prove it. I couldn't have been in Redford signing this paper. But there was something else, a detail only I would notice. The date was written as Dec 12th, 2025. I never wrote dates like that. In my industry, on every blueprint, every contract, every email, I use the ISO standard or the full American format, 12/12/2025 or December 12th, 2025. I never used the A or ND or ST after the numbers. It was a habit drilled into me since my first year of architecture school. The person who wrote this date was the same person who wrote grocery lists. Valerie. I flipped the page to the notary section. A document like this needed to be notarized. A witness had to swear they saw me sign it. State of Colorado, County of Redford, subscribed and sworn to before me this 12th day of December. Notary Public. Brenda Miller. I froze. Brenda Miller. I knew that name. Brenda Miller wasn't just a notary. She was the woman Valerie played tennis with on Tuesdays. She was the woman who came to the house for wine and cheese nights, the one who always complimented Valerie's curtains. A wave of nausea hit me. This wasn't just my family acting alone. They had recruited help. Valerie had used her friend at the bank to bypass the rules. Brenda must have stamped this document without me ever being in the room, knowing full well I wasn't there. It was a conspiracy. It was a criminal ring operating out of a suburban living room. I took out my phone and photographed every single page. The application, the fake signature, the notary stamp, the driver's license copy they had attached, which was an old one I had lost a year ago and replaced. They must have fished it out of a drawer. I walked out of the bank with the file tucked under my arm. I felt like I was carrying a bomb. I met Dana back at her office an hour later. I slammed the file onto her mahogany desk. "They forged it," I said, my voice trembling with adrenaline. Look at the date, and the notary is Valerie's best friend." Dana put on her glasses and examined the papers. She was silent for a long minute, comparing the fake signature to the real one on the retainer agreement I had just signed. "This is sloppy," Dana murmured. "Arrogant and sloppy. They didn't think you would ever see this. They thought they could just pay the monthly minimums from the loan proceeds, and you would be none the wiser until they died or the money ran out." She looked up at me, her face grim. "Angela, do you understand what this means? If this loan funds on the 28th, that money goes into a joint account. Valerie will drain it within a week. She will move it to offshore accounts or buy assets in cash that you can't trace. And you will be left with a $450,000 debt on a house you own. You will be paying for their retirement for the next 30 years. "I want to call the police," I said. "I want to arrest them. Now." "No," Dana said sharply. "Why not? They are stealing from me." "Because right now, it is your word against theirs regarding the signature." Dana explained, her lawyer brain taking over. "They will say you signed it and just forgot, or they will say you gave verbal permission. Brenda Miller will lie to protect her license. It becomes a messy civil dispute that could drag on for years while the money disappears." Dana stood up and walked to the window. "We need them to hang themselves. We need undeniable proof that they are proceeding with this fraud, even after being given a chance to stop. We need to catch them in the act of trying to take the money." She turned back to me, her eyes gleaming with a cold, strategic light. "Here is what we are going to do. I am going to file a quiet title action and an emergency injunction with the court, but I will seal it until the very last second. I will send a formal notice to the bank's legal department alerting them to the contested signature, but I will instruct them to freeze the file internally without alerting the applicant, your father." "So the bank will know, but Dad won't?" I asked. "Exactly. The bank will stop the disbursement of funds to protect themselves. But to Richard and Valerie, it will look like the process is moving forward smoothly. They will think the money is coming on the 28th. And then? And then, Dana smiled. You go to that Christmas party, you let them give their speeches, you let them act like the lords of the manor, you let them believe they have won. And when the moment is perfect, we drop the hammer. We reveal not just the will, but the forgery. We reveal that the money they are counting on is never coming. We destroy their credibility, their finances, and their social standing in one stroke. It sounds cruel, I said quiet. It is not cruel, Dana said. It is justice. They are trying to ruin your life, Angela. They are trying to turn you into an indentured servant to their greed. You are not attacking them. You are just turning on the light so the world can see the cockroaches. I nodded. She was right. Go home, Dana instructed. This is the hardest part. You have to go back to that house and act like you know nothing. You have to eat dinner with the woman who forged your name. You have to listen to your father complain about money. You cannot crack. If they suspect you know, they might run, or they might try to destroy the evidence. I drove back to Redford in a daze. The sun had set, and the house was glowing with Christmas lights. From the street, it looked magical, warm, inviting, safe. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I looked at my hands. They were the hands of a builder. I created things. I solved problems. I did not destroy. But as I looked at the front door, I remembered the way Valerie had looked at me when she said I was selfish. I remembered the way my father had looked away when I asked for help. I wasn't destroying a family. I was demolishing a condemned building before it collapsed on top of me. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Angela, is that you? Valerie's voice floated from the living room, sugary and fake. You are late. We ordered pizza. I walked into the living room. Valerie was on the sofa, flipping through a catalog of luxury cruises. My father was pouring a drink. Work was crazy, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat and distant. Sorry. You work too hard, Valerie sighed, not looking up from a picture of a Caribbean beach. You really should learn to relax. Life isn't all about grinding. You know, sometimes you just have to let things come to you. She exchanged a quick, sly glance with my father. They shared a secret smile. They were thinking about the $450,000. They were thinking about the cruise Valerie was about to book. I forced the corners of my mouth up. It wasn't a smile. It was a baring of teeth. You are right, Valerie, I said. I think I am finally starting to understand that, in fact, I have a feeling this Christmas is going to change everything. That is the spirit, my father said, raising his glass. To a new year, to prosperity. Prosperity, I echoed. I walked upstairs to my room, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. But as I closed my door and looked at the hidden camera I had installed on my bookshelf earlier that week, the fear evaporated. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the hunter, and the trap was set. All they had to do was keep walking. The automatic doors of the Oak Creek Care Center slid open with a soft exhale, a sound that felt strangely like a sigh of relief. I walked straight to room 3B, my heels clicking rhythmically on the linoleum floor. I felt different than I had the last time I was here. I was no longer the confused granddaughter seeking comfort. I was a soldier returning to base with intel. Grandma Margaret was waiting for me. She had pushed her wheelchair away from the window and was sitting squarely in the middle of the room, her hands folded over the handle of her cane. She looked like a queen on a throne made of chrome and vinyl. Well, she asked, her voice sharp, did you find it? I didn't say a word. I pulled out my phone and swiped to the photo I had taken in the bank manager's office. I held the screen up to her face. Margaret adjusted her glasses. She stared at the image of the loan application for a long time. She looked at the forged signature, the loopy, childish S that looked nothing like mine. She looked at the notary stamp of Brenda Miller. So, Margaret said, leaning back, They did it. They actually did it. They forged my name, I said, the anger simmering low in my gut. Valerie wrote it. I would recognize that handwriting anywhere. It is the same handwriting that writes the passive-aggressive notes on the refrigerator, and Brenda stamped it. And the amount? $450,000, I said. They are gutting the house. Margaret let out a dry, humorless chuckle. 450,000. That is not a loan. Angela, that is an exit strategy. They are cashing out. They are planning to take that money and run the clock out until Richard dies or I die, leaving you with nothing but a shell and a mountain of debt. She tapped her cane on the floor, a steady, deliberative rhythm. Where is the gathering this year? She asked suddenly. The house, I replied. Valerie insisted. She wants to show off the new decorations. She invited everyone, Aunt Sarah, Uncle Ben, the cousins from out of state, even some of the neighbors. Good, Margaret nodded, a dangerous glint appearing in her eyes. A full audience. Grandma, what are you thinking? I am thinking, she said, smoothing the blanket over her knees, that it has been a long time since I attended a family Christmas party. People think I am too old, too sick. They think I am stuck in this room, fading away. She looked up at me, and her smile was terrifyingly sharp. I think it is time I reminded them that I am still the head of this family. You want to come to the party? I asked. I do not just want to come, she corrected me. I want to be the center of attention. I want Valerie to feel comfortable. I want her to feel like the queen bee, prancing around in her red dress, thinking she has gotten away with the perfect crime. And then, when she is at her highest point, we are going to kick the ladder out from under her. She motioned for me to hand her the phone. Call Dana. Put her on speaker. I dialed Dana's number. She answered on the first ring. I have the file, I told her. Grandma is here. Excellent. Dana's voice was crisp and professional. I have already drafted the complaint. I have the affidavit regarding the forgery ready for your signature. I can file the emergency injunction on the morning of the 26th, the moment the courts open. But we need to serve them. We need to confront them. No, Margaret interrupted, her voice loud and clear. Dana, dear, we are not going to serve them in a quiet office. We are going to serve them dessert. Margaret outlined the plan. It was ruthless. It was theatrical. It was perfect. I will arrive at the party early, Margaret said. I will play the frail old woman. I will cough. I will complain about my hip. I will make Valerie feel superior. She loves feeling superior. It makes her sloppy. And me? I asked. You, Margaret pointed a finger at me, are going to be the victim. You are going to take every insult she throws at you. You are going to let her treat you like dirt. You are going to let Richard ignore you. You need to look defeated. Angela, if they think you are beaten, they will not have their guard up. I can do that, I said, though the thought of it made my stomach turn. Dana, Margaret continued, addressing the phone, you will be the surprise guest. Come at 8 o'clock. That is when we usually do the gifts. Walk right in. Do not knock. Just walk in and put the papers on the table. I will be there, Dana promised. I will bring the original will, the trust documents, and the bank file. There is one more thing, Margaret added, her voice dropping lower. Angela, you need eyes and ears in that room before the party starts. I want to hear them. I want to hear what they say when they think no one is listening. Can you handle that? Yes, I said. I can handle it. Margaret leaned back, looking satisfied. Oh, and Angela? There is a clause in the trust I haven't told you about yet. It is the bad actor provision. What is that? Your grandfather insisted on it, Margaret said, her eyes softening with the memory of him. He said, Maggie, if anyone ever tries to cheat our girl, I want to be able to strike them down from the grave. So, the trust states that if any beneficiary or life tenant, that means Richard, attempts to defraud the trust or encumber the property without consent, their interest is immediately terminated, not after a lawsuit, immediately, the moment we prove fraud. Richard loses his right to live in that house. He is out on the street. I stared at her. You mean, we can evict them? We are not evicting them, Margaret said coldly. They evicted themselves the moment Valerie picked up that pen and forged your name. I left the nursing home with a sense of purpose that bordered on manic. I had work to do. I stopped at an electronics store on the way home and bought a high-end digital voice recorder. It was small, black, and unobtrusive. I also bought a roll of black gaffer tape. When I got back to the house, it was quiet. Valerie and Richard were out running errands, probably spending money they didn't have on last-minute lavish gifts for Chloe. The house smelled of pine and cinnamon, a deceptive warmth masking the rot underneath. I went into the dining room. This was the heart of the house, the place where Valerie held court. The large mahogany table was already set for Christmas dinner, with crystal glasses and silver cutlery gleaming under the chandelier. I crawled under the table. My heart was pounding. If they walked in now, how would I explain this? Just checking the floorboards. Valerie. I found a spot on the underside of the table, right in the center, where the wood support beam met the leg. I taped the recorder securely, making sure the microphone was facing outward. I set it to voice activation mode. It would record only when people were talking, saving battery life. I crawled out and dusted off my knees. I looked at the room. It looked perfect. No one would ever know that every word spoken at this table would now be evidence in a criminal trial. I went upstairs to my room and waited. When they came home, the performance began. "Angela," Valerie called out from the hallway, "come help us with the groceries. Don't just sit up there." I took a deep breath. Showtime. I walked downstairs, keeping my shoulders slumped, my eyes downcast. I grabbed the bags from her hands. "Did you get the wine?" I asked. "Of course I got the wine," Valerie snapped. "Someone has to make sure this party is classy. God knows you wouldn't know where to start." Usually, I would have snapped back. I would have made a comment about how I designed 5-star hotels for a living. But today, I just nodded. "You are right, Valerie. The house looks beautiful." She paused, looking at me with suspicion. She wasn't used to me agreeing with her. She narrowed her eyes, searching for the sarcasm, but I kept my face blank. "Well," she sniffed, smoothing her hair, "at least you are acknowledging the effort. Just try not to mope in the corner tomorrow. All right? We have important guests coming. I don't want you bringing down the mood with your singleness." "I will try to be cheerful," I said. My father walked in, carrying a case of beer. He looked tired. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Hey, Dad," I said. "Hey, Ang," he mumbled, pushing past me to the kitchen. I watched them. They were so confident. They moved through the house with the heavy, flat-footed assurance of ownership. They had no idea that beneath the dining table, a tiny red light was blinking. They had no idea that in a nursing home 5 miles away, an old woman was polishing her cane like a weapon. And they certainly had no idea that the daughter they treated like a servant was essentially the landlord they were trying to rob. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the plan in my head. Phase 1. The Trojan Horse. Margaret arrives. She plays the role of the dying matriarch. She makes them feel safe. Phase 2. The Provocation. I let Valerie abuse me. I let her push and push until she feels invincible. I need her to say it. I need her to say something cruel and definitive in front of everyone. Phase 3. The Signal. Margaret says the words. "Watch this." Phase 4. The Hammer. Dana enters. It was a dangerous game. If Valerie sensed a trap, she might shut down. If Richard grew a conscience at the last minute, he might confess before we could nail them. But looking at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster that I had paid to fix, I knew we had to do it. The next morning was Christmas Eve. The house was a flurry of activity. The caterers arrived at 2. The guests started arriving at 5. By 6 o'clock, the living room was full. The air was thick with the smell of roasting turkey and expensive perfume. My cousin Sarah was there with her new husband. Uncle Ben was already drunk, telling loud stories by the fireplace. Chloe was posing for selfies with the tree, making sure to get the Gucci logo on her belt in the frame. Then, the doorbell rang. I opened it. Grandma Margaret was there, but she wasn't in her usual wheelchair. She was standing, leaning heavily on her cane, wearing her best Sunday suit, a deep navy blue wool that made her look severe and elegant. "Grandma!" Chloe squealed, rushing over to hug her, more for the performance of being a good granddaughter than actual affection. "I didn't think you were coming. Mom said you were too sick." "I had a burst of energy," Margaret said, her voice wavering slightly. She played it perfectly. She leaned into Chloe, looking frail. "Help me to the chair, dear. My bones are aching." Valerie swept into the hallway. "Mother Sutton! What a surprise!" Her smile was tight. She wasn't happy. Margaret was invariable she hadn't accounted for. "I couldn't miss Christmas, Valerie," Margaret said, allowing herself to be guided to the armchair in the corner. "Especially when you have done so much, redecorating." Valerie preened. "Do you like it? We wanted to elevate the space." "It is very expensive," Margaret observed. "Quality costs money," Valerie said dismissively. "Something Richard and I agree on. We believe in investing in our lifestyle." I stood by the wall, holding a tray of appetizers. I saw Margaret catch my eye. Just a flicker, a microscopic nod. The game is on. The evening wore on. I served drinks. I took coats. I listened to my relatives ask me why I wasn't married yet, why I was still finding myself while Chloe was doing so well. A joke, considering Chloe was unemployed and I was a lead architect. But I smiled. I nodded. I ate the humble pie. "Angela is just taking her time," Valerie told Aunt Sarah loud enough for me to hear. "Not everyone has Chloe's spark. Some people are just late bloomers, or non-bloomers." The room chuckled. I looked down at the floor. "Is everything okay, Angela?" my father asked me quietly when he came to get a refill. It was the first time he had spoken to me directly all night. "I am fine, Dad," I said. "Just want everyone to be happy." He looked at me, and for a second, I saw guilt, real, raw guilt. He opened his mouth, and I thought, here it is. He is going to confess. He is going to tell me about the loan. "Dad," I prompted. "Make sure the ice bucket is full," he said abruptly, turning away. The moment passed. The guilt was there, but the cowardice was stronger. 8 o'clock approached. The gift exchange was about to begin. I moved to my position by the tree. I had the small velvet box for Grandma in my pocket. I could feel the weight of it. Valerie stood in the center of the room, clapping her hands. "All right, everyone. Gather round. It is time for presents." She looked radiant. She looked powerful. She looked like a woman who thought she had gotten away with murder. I looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. 7:58. Dana would be parking her car right now. She would be walking up the driveway, her briefcase heavy with the truth. I looked at Grandma. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands resting on the head of her cane. She wasn't looking at the tree. She was looking at Valerie with the detached curiosity of a scientist watching a bug crawl towards a zapper. I took a deep breath. "Valerie," I said, stepping forward, "I have a gift for Grandma." Valerie turned to me. Her eyes flashed. The trap was sprung. "Not now, Angela," she said. "I just want to give it to her," I insisted, pushing the box forward. Valerie's face contorted. This was it, the moment we had planned for, the moment she would show her true colors. "I said no," she snapped, and the room went quiet. I braced myself. The slap was coming. The insult was coming. And after that, the storm. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times, signaling the beginning of the end. The living room of the Sutton house was a masterpiece of manufactured cheer. Valerie had outdone herself this year. The tree was a towering spruce, flocked with artificial snow and draped in ribbons of gold and burgundy velvet. Underneath, the presents were stacked in a precise architectural pyramid, wrapped in paper so thick and expensive it felt like fabric. The air smelled of cinnamon candles and the roast beef that was cooling in the dining room, a scent that should have been comforting but instead turned my stomach. Valerie moved through the room like a monarch surveying her kingdom. She had changed her lipstick, a fresh coat of blood red that matched her gown. She held a crystal flute of champagne in one hand, gesturing with it as she spoke to my Uncle Ben and Aunt Sarah. "It has been a challenging few years," Valerie said, her voice pitched perfectly to carry across the room. "But Richard and I have been working so hard, and I am thrilled to say that we are finally turning a corner. This coming year, it is going to be our year, a whole new chapter for the Sutton family." She caught my eye as she said it, and her smile sharpened. I knew exactly what that new chapter entailed. It involved my credit score, my inheritance, and $450,000 of stolen money. My father, Richard, stood by the fireplace. He looked like a ghost haunting his own party. His skin was gray, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the drafty windows. Every time Valerie looked at him, he straightened his spine and forced a smile that looked painful. He raised his glass when she toasted. "To the future," he mumbled, taking a long swallow of scotch. I stood near the entrance to the dining room, my back against the wall. I could see the faint red blink of the recorder taped under the table from where I stood, a tiny lighthouse in the storm. "So, Chloe," Aunt Sarah asked, her voice shrill with excitement, "I heard rumors about a move?" Chloe, who was lounging on the velvet settee with her shoes off, lit up. She swirled her wineglass, looking every inch the spoiled princess. "Oh, yes, I am looking at this amazing loft in the city. It has exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, the whole vibe. It is pricey, obviously, but Mom and Dad are helping me with the down payment. They want me to have a secure start." I felt a vein throb in my temple. A secure start. They were buying her a luxury apartment with the equity from my mother's house. The audacity was so breathtaking I almost laughed. "That is wonderful," Uncle Ben said, clapping my father on the shoulder. "Good for you. Richard, taking care of your girls." "We do what we can," my father said, his voice cracking slightly. All right, Valerie clapped her hands, setting her champagne flute down on a coaster. "Enough chatter. It is time for the gifts. Everyone, find a seat." The room shuffled into compliance. I stayed standing. There was no seat for me in the inner circle, and I preferred it that way. I wanted to be ready to move. Valerie took her position by the tree. She picked up the first box, a large one wrapped in silver. "For my darling husband," she cooed, handing it to Richard. He opened it with fumbling fingers. It was a watch, a Rolex. I could tell from the green box, even from across the room. A watch that cost more than the roof repair I had paid for last winter. "Valerie," he whispered, looking stricken. We shouldn't have." "Nonsense," she beamed. "You deserve the best. We can afford it now." She continued the distribution. It was a performance of excess. For Chloe, there was a set of diamond stud earrings and the keys to the new car parked in the driveway. A lease, surely, but expensive. For Aunt Sarah, a cashmere scarf. For the cousins, high-end electronics. With every name she called, Valerie's voice grew louder, more triumphant. She was buying their loyalty. She was buying their admiration. And she was doing it with a credit card that she planned to pay off with the fraudulent loan. I waited. My name was never called. The pile under the tree dwindled until only the empty skirt remained. The awkwardness in the room began to rise like floodwater. Even the cousins stopped tearing at their wrapping paper, sensing the omission. "Oh," Valerie said, acting surprised as she looked at the empty floor. "I think that is everyone." "You forgot Angela." A young cousin, Timmy, piped up from the floor. Valerie looked at me. The mask of the benevolent hostess slipped, revealing the cruelty underneath. "Oh, Timmy," she sighed, shaking her head. "Angela is a grown woman. She understands that Christmas is really for the children and, well, for those who contribute to the joy of the household. We decided that Angela's gift this year is the roof over her head. Living here rent-free is a very generous present, don't you think? The room went silent. Aunt Sarah looked down at her new scarf, suddenly uncomfortable. My father took another drink, draining the glass. I did not flinch. I did not cry. This was phase 2. I needed to let her dig the hole deeper. That is fair, Valerie, I said. My voice was calm, which seemed to irritate her more than if I had screamed. I understand. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small velvet box containing the locket. I didn't expect anything, I continued, walking slowly toward the center of the room. But I still have a gift to give. I walked toward Grandma Margaret. She was watching me, her eyes bright and hard as diamonds. She gave me the smallest nod. Grandma, I said, extending the box, this is for you. Valerie moved faster than I expected. She stepped between me and Margaret, blocking my path. Her perfume, heavy gardenia, hit me like a physical blow. No, she said. Excuse me? I asked. I said no, Valerie repeated, her voice rising. She snatched the box from my hand before I could react. She looked at it with disdain, as if it contained a dead insect. We are not doing this. You do not get to play the saint. Angela, you do not get to ruin the mood with your cheap sentimentality. She tossed the box onto the side table. It skidded across the polished wood and fell onto the floor with a heartbreaking thud. You do not deserve to receive gifts, Valerie hissed, her face inches from mine. And you certainly do not deserve to give them, not in this house, not after everything we have done for you. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, the anger I had been bottling up for 20 years, the rage at every slight, every stolen moment, every dollar taken, surged forward. I remembered the recorder. I remembered the plan. I needed her to say it. I needed her to admit it. Everything you have done for me? I asked, raising my voice so it carried to the back of the room. You mean letting me live in the house my mother died in? The house I pay to maintain? You pay for nothing, Valerie shouted. You buy a few groceries and think you are a martyr. I paid $12,000 for the roof last year, I said, my voice steady and cold. I paid $4,500 for the property taxes 2 months ago because you hid the bill. I paid for the new furnace. I paid for the painting in this very room. I paid for the insulation in the walls. I pointed to the Rolex on Richard's wrist. I probably paid for that watch, too. Dad, did you use the credit card I paid off last week to buy it? Richard flinched as if I had thrown a stone at him. Angela, stop, he pleaded weakly. No, I won't stop, I said, turning back to Valerie. You stand here talking about a new chapter, about how generous you are, but every single person in this room should know that the only reason the lights are on is because I paid the electric bill. The only reason there is heat is because I fixed the boiler. Valerie was shaking. Her face had turned a mottled shade of red. She was losing control. The narrative she had built, the wealthy, benevolent matriarch, was cracking, and I was holding the hammer. You shut up, she screamed. You ungrateful, miserable little parasite. You have nothing. You are nothing. You are a 30-year-old failure living in your daddy's guest room because no man wants you. It is not daddy's guest room, I shot back, and we both know that, don't we, Valerie? That was the trigger. Valerie's hand flew up. It wasn't a calculated move. It was a spasm of pure defensive rage. Crack. Her palm connected with my cheek. It was harder than I expected. My head snapped to the side. The sound echoed through the room, sharp and violent, cutting through the holiday jazz playing on the speakers. The silence that followed was absolute. My cheek burned. My ear rang. I tasted a tiny metallic tang of blood where my tooth had cut my lip. I slowly turned my head back to face her. Valerie was breathing hard, her hand still raised slightly. For a second, she looked shocked at her own violence. But then, she looked at the faces around the room, shocked, wide-eyed, and she doubled down. She had to be right. She had to be the victim. You asked for that, she spat. You pushed me. You come into my home. You disrespect your father. You try to humiliate us on Christmas Eve. You are toxic. Angela, you are a cancer in this family." I looked at my father. "Dad?" I asked, my voice trembling, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of the final trap. "Are you going to let her hit me?" Richard looked at his wife. He looked at the Rolex on his wrist. He looked at the lifestyle he was terrified of losing. He made his choice. "You shouldn't have provoked her, Angela," he muttered, looking at the floor. "You know how she gets. Just go to your room. Don't ruin the night." "Don't ruin the night?" I repeated, incredulous. "She is right, Angela," Aunt Sarah piped up from the sofa, her voice nervous. She clutched her new cashmere scarf. "It is Christmas. Let us not make a scene. Just apologize to Valerie and let us eat dinner." The injustice of it was suffocating. They were all complicit. They would rather watch me get assaulted than risk the awkwardness of a confrontation. They would rather sip their free champagne than ask why the daughter of the house was being treated like an intruder. I looked at Chloe. She was smirking. She was actually smirking. She held her new car keys in her lap, watching the drama like it was a reality TV show she was starring in. "God, you are so dramatic," Chloe said, rolling her eyes. "Just leave if you are going to be such a downer." I stood there, feeling the isolation wrap around me like a cold blanket. I had expected them to be bad. I hadn't expected them to be this hollow. But then, I heard it. The sound of a cane striking the hardwood floor. Thud, thud, thud. It was a slow, heavy rhythm. Grandma Margaret pushed herself up from the armchair. She refused Chloe's offer of help with a sharp wave of her hand. She stood tall, her spine straightening, shedding the act of the frail invalid she had worn all evening. She walked into the center of the room. She stopped between me and Valerie. She looked at my red cheek. She reached out a hand, her fingers cool and dry, and touched the spot where Valerie had hit me. She looked at me with a fierce, burning pride. Then she turned to Valerie. "You struck her," Margaret said. Her voice was not loud, but it had a timbre that vibrated in the chest. It was the voice of a woman who had buried a husband and a daughter and had no patience left for trivial things. "She was being disrespectful. Mother Sutton," Valerie said, trying to regain her composure, smoothing her dress. "She needed discipline." "Discipline?" Margaret repeated the word, tasting it. "You think you have the right to discipline her? You think you have the right to decide what she deserves?" "I am the lady of this house," Valerie declared, lifting her chin, "and I said she does not deserve gifts." Margaret looked around the room. She made eye contact with Richard, who shrank back against the mantelpiece. She looked at Aunt Sarah, who looked away. She looked at Chloe, whose smirk faltered. "Well," Margaret said, a cold smile touching her lips, "if you say she does not deserve gifts, then I suppose you are right." Valerie let out a breath, thinking she had won, thinking the old woman had capitulated. "Thank you, Mother Sutton," Valerie said. "I am glad someone sees reason." "However," Margaret continued, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous, "if Angela does not deserve a gift, then perhaps the rest of you have not realized what the real gift of this evening is." She reached into her pocket. She didn't pull out a present. She pulled out a cell phone. She placed it on the table next to the discarded locket. "You wanted to show us a new chapter, Valerie?" Margaret asked softly. "You wanted to show us who really owns this family?" Margaret looked at me. The signal. "All right," Margaret said, her voice ringing out like a judgment bell. "Watch this." At that exact moment, the heavy oak front door swung open. It wasn't the wind. Donna Ruiz stepped into the hallway. She wasn't wearing festive clothes. She was wearing a charcoal gray suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase, and wearing an expression that could strip paint. She didn't knock. She didn't smile. She walked straight into the living room, the sound of her heels sharp and terrifyingly professional. Valerie spun around. "Who the hell are you? You can't just walk in here." Dana ignored her. She walked to the dining table, pushed aside a platter of appetizers, and laid the briefcase down with a heavy thud. The air in the room shifted instantly. The party was over. The trial had begun. The doorbell rang, a sharp, electric chime that sliced through the thick, suffocating silence of the living room. It was a mundane sound, the kind you hear every day, but in that moment, it sounded like a gavel striking a block of wood. Valerie blinked, her hand slowly lowering from where she had slapped me. She looked at the front door, then back at me, confusion warring with her rage. She clearly expected me to run to my room crying. She did not expect a visitor. "Who on earth is that?" she snapped, wiping a smudge of her own lipstick from the corner of her mouth. "If this is one of your friends coming to create a scene, Angela, I swear to God." I did not answer her. I turned my back on her, a gesture that made her gasp, and walked to the foyer. My cheek was throbbing with a pulse that matched the beat of my heart, hot and fast. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. Dana Ruiz stood on the porch. Snow was falling softly behind her, framing her like a specter of judgment. She wore a charcoal wool coat over her suit, and in her hand, she gripped a thick leather briefcase. She looked past me, into the brightly lit living room, and gave me a single, professional nod. "I am here," she said. "Please come in," I said, my voice steady. I stepped aside. Dana walked into the house, shaking the snow from her boots on the mat with deliberate precision. I led her into the living room. The entire family was staring. Uncle Ben had his drink halfway to his mouth. Chloe was looking at Dana's expensive briefcase with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. My father, Richard, looked like a man who was watching a firing squad assemble. I stood next to Dana and faced the room. "Everyone," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back wall, "I would like you to meet Dana Ruiz. She is my attorney." For a second, there was silence. Then, Valerie threw her head back and let out a harsh, barking laugh. It was a brittle sound, desperate and jagged. "Your attorney?" Valerie scoffed, looking at the other guests for validation. "Oh, this is rich. This is truly pathetic. Angela, you get disciplined for being a brat, and you call a lawyer? What are you going to do? Sue me for emotional distress because I didn't give you a present? You are making a fool of yourself." She took a step toward Dana, waving her hand dismissively. "You can leave. This is a private family gathering. You are trespassing." Dana did not blink. She did not raise her voice. She simply walked over to the coffee table, pushed aside a crystal bowl of pine cones, and set her briefcase down. The heavy thud of the leather hitting the wood echoed in the room. "Actually, Mrs. Sutton," Dana said, her tone cool and conversational, "I am not trespassing. I am here at the invitation of the property owner." "I am the owner," Valerie spat, "and I am telling you to get out." Dana smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. She clicked the latches of her briefcase open, snap, snap, and lifted the lid. "Well," Dana said, pulling out a thick stack of files, "that brings us to the first item on tonight's agenda. We need to clarify a few things about who actually owns what." She picked up the first document. It was old, the paper slightly yellowed, enclosed in a protective plastic sleeve. "This," Dana announced, holding it up, "is the last will and testament of Jeremiah and Margaret Sutton, dated August 14th, 1995. My father let out a small, strangled noise. "No," he whispered. Dana ignored him. She began to read. Article 4, Section B. Upon the death of our daughter, Maria, the title to the property at 42 Maple Drive shall not transfer to her spouse, Richard Sutton. Instead, the property shall be placed into the Sutton Family Trust." Dana paused, letting the words hang in the air. She looked directly at Valerie. "The sole beneficiary of that trust," Dana continued, her voice hardening, "is Angela Sutton." A gasp rippled through the room. Aunt Sarah put a hand over her mouth. Chloe dropped her car keys. They jingled loudly on the floor, but she didn't bend to pick them up. "That is a lie," Valerie screeched, her face turning a mottled purple. "Richard owns this house. He paid off the mortgage. He told me. She spun around to face my father. Richard, tell her. Tell her it is your house. Richard couldn't speak. He was leaning against the mantelpiece, his face gray, staring at his shoes. His silence was a confession louder than any scream. Dana turned a page. Mr. Sutton has a life estate, she explained to the room, breaking it down so even the cousins could understand. That means he is allowed to live here. He is a tenant. He does not own the bricks. He does not own the land. And he certainly does not have the right to use this house as collateral for a loan. Grandma? Chloe whispered, looking at the old woman in the armchair. Grandma Margaret sat up straight. She looked like a queen passing sentence. It is true, Margaret said, her voice clear and strong. Your grandfather and I knew exactly who Richard was. We knew he was weak, and we knew that if a woman like Valerie ever came along, she would pick his pockets and leave our granddaughter with nothing. So we protected the asset. Margaret looked at Valerie with profound disdain. I stayed silent for 20 years. I let you play house. I let you pretend you were the lady of the manor because I wanted Angela to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet without relying on an inheritance. But you... Margaret shook her head. You got greedy. Valerie, you mistook my silence for senility. And now, you have forced me to use the weapon I kept hidden in the dark. Valerie was shaking. Her entire identity, the wealthy wife, the homeowner, the hostess, was evaporating in front of the people she tried so hard to impress. This is forgery, she stammered. You are lying. Speaking of forgery, Dana interrupted, her voice cutting like a knife. She reached back into her briefcase and pulled out a fresh stack of papers. These were white, crisp, and stapled together. Let us talk about the second item on the agenda, Dana said. This is a loan application submitted to Oak Ridge Mutual Bank on December 12th of this year. She held up the signature page. Mr. Sutton, Mrs. Sutton, Dana said, looking at the couple. Can you explain why Angela's signature appears on this application for a home equity line of credit in the amount of $450,000? The number hung in the air. $450,000. My cousins looked at each other. Uncle Ben set his drink down. The atmosphere in the room shifted from shock to judgment. She signed it, Valerie blurted out, panic making her voice shrill. She signed it weeks ago. She agreed to help the family. I did not, I said. I stepped forward, standing next to Dana. I was in Denver all day on December 12th. I have credit card receipts, toll booth records, and 5 witnesses who can place me 60 miles away from where this document was supposedly signed. Dana pointed to the paper. And then there is the matter of the notary, Brenda Miller, a close personal friend of yours. Isn't she, Valerie? Valerie's mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. We have already spoken to the bank, Dana said. She pulled out a formal letter on the bank's stationery. This is a letter from the fraud department at Oak Ridge Mutual. As of this morning, the loan has been suspended. The funds you were expecting to hit your account on the 28th, they are not coming, ever. But, Chloe spoke up, her voice trembling. But the apartment, the down payment, you said the money was coming next week. There is no money, Chloe, I said softly. It was all a lie. They were going to steal the equity from my house to pay for your apartment. That is not true, Valerie screamed. We were investing. We were going to pay it back. With what? I asked. Dad hasn't sold a commercial property in 2 years. You spend $10,000 a month on credit cards. You weren't going to pay it back. You were going to let the bank foreclose. And since the loan is in my name, I would be the one left with the debt and no home. You have no proof we did this maliciously. Richard finally spoke, his voice hoarse. It was a misunderstanding. We thought we had implied consent. Implied consent? I laughed. It was a cold sound. Is that what you call it when you practice my signature on a notepad? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the digital recorder I had used the night before. Or rather, the recording I had captured 2 nights ago, when I left my phone recording in the kitchen while I pretended to take out the trash. You want proof of intent? I asked. Listen to this. I pressed play. The volume was high. Valerie's voice filled the silent living room. It was unmistakable. Arrogant. Laughing. Cruel. She is so stupid. Richard, she doesn't even read her mail. Once the money hits, we wire the deposit for Chloe's place, and then we book that cruise. By the time Angela figures out there is a lien on the house, we will be drinking margaritas. And what is she going to do? Sue her own father? She is too pathetic to fight back. It is free money. Honey, we are just taking what is owed to us for putting up with her. The recording ended with the sound of clinking glasses. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy, crushing. I looked at my relatives. The change was immediate. Aunt Sarah, who had told me to apologize 5 minutes ago, was now looking at Valerie with horror. She took a distinct step away from her. Uncle Ben looked at his Rolex watch, the twin of the one Richard had just received, and looked sick, wondering if it was bought with stolen money. One of my younger cousins, a teenager named Josh, had his phone out. He was holding it up. The camera lens pointed directly at Valerie. He was live streaming. The downfall of the Sutton family was being broadcast in real time. "You," Valerie whispered, looking at the recorder in my hand. "You little snake. You recorded us?" "Colorado is a one-party consent state," Dana interjected smoothly. Angela was a party to the conversation, or rather, she was present in the home she owns, perfectly legal, unlike mortgage fraud, which carries a sentence of up to 30 years in federal prison. Valerie collapsed onto the sofa. The fight had drained out of her. She looked suddenly old, her makeup settling into the lines of her face. She looked at the Christmas tree, at the pile of expensive gifts, and realized they were nothing but evidence. Richard was weeping. He had his hands over his face, sobbing quietly. It wasn't the crying of a man who was sorry. It was the crying of a man who had been caught. Grandma Margaret tapped her cane on the floor again. Thud, thud. "We are not done," she said. She beckoned Dana. "The trust, the bad actor clause, read it." Dana flipped to the back of the binder. Article 9, Termination of Life Estate. Dana read, "In the event that the life tenant, Richard Sutton, attempts to defraud the trust, commit waste upon the property, or encumber the property with unauthorized debt, his life estate shall terminate immediately and automatically." Dana looked up, her eyes locking onto my father. "This isn't a threat, Richard, it is a trigger. By submitting that fraudulent application, you triggered Article 9. As of December 12th, when you signed that paper, you lost your right to live in this house." "What?" Richard looked up, his eyes red. You are kicking me out? I am your father." "You ceased acting like a father a long time ago," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "A father protects his child. He doesn't steal her identity. He doesn't let his wife slap her across the face in front of an audience." "This house is now under the sole control of Angela Sutton," Dana announced. "She has the legal right to determine who is allowed on the premises." The room turned to me. Every eye was on me. The poor relation, the ungrateful daughter, the failure. I stood tall. I felt the sting on my cheek, but it didn't hurt anymore. It felt like a badge of honor. I looked at Valerie, huddled on the sofa. I looked at Richard, broken by the fireplace. I looked at Chloe, who was staring at me with fear for the first time in her life. "I want you out," I said. "Now?" Valerie gasped. "It is Christmas Eve. It is snowing." "I don't care," I said. "You told me I didn't deserve gifts. You told me I didn't deserve to be here. You were right about one thing. Valerie, I don't deserve this treatment, and I am done paying for it." I pointed to the door. "You have 1 hour to pack your bags. You can take your clothes and your toiletries. Everything else, the furniture, the electronics, the gifts, bought with my credit, stays here until Dana can audit the finances. If you take so much as a silver spoon that doesn't belong to you, I will have the police arrest you for theft on top of the fraud." "You can't do this," Chloe screamed, standing up. "Where am I supposed to go?" "You have a new car, don't you?" I asked, looking at the keys on the floor. I suggest you start driving. Maybe you can sleep in that loft you were bragging about. Oh, wait. You can't afford it. Angela, please. Aunt Sarah tried to intervene, but her voice was weak. Ideally, we could resolve this. Resolve it? I turned on her. You watched her hit me. Sarah, you watched her spit on me, and you told me to apologize. If you say one more word, you can leave with them. Sarah shut her mouth instantly. I looked back at my father and stepmother. 1 hour, I repeated. Dana will supervise. If you aren't out by 9:30, I am calling the sheriff, and given that he is already investigating the notary fraud, I don't think he will be on your side. Grandma Margaret smiled. She leaned back in her chair, looking 10 years younger. She reached out and picked up the locket from the floor where Valerie had thrown it. She dusted it off and clasped it around her neck. Merry Christmas, Valerie, Grandma said softly. I told you to watch. Richard and Valerie stood up slowly. The humiliation was total. They had to walk past the guests they had tried to impress, past the tree they had decorated with lies, and up the stairs to pack their lives into suitcases. As they trudged up the stairs, the silence in the room broke. The guests began to whisper. Phones were raised. The facade of the perfect Sutton family had shattered into a million sharp pieces, and I was the one holding the broom. I walked over to the table and sat down next to Grandma. I took her hand. It was trembling. But this time, I knew it wasn't from weakness. It was from adrenaline. You did good, kid, she whispered. I learned from the best, I replied. I looked at the flashing red light of the recorder under the table. I reached down and turned it off. I didn't need it anymore. The verdict was in. The silence that had settled over the room following my ultimatum did not last. It was shattered by a sound that was less like a human voice and more like the shriek of metal tearing under pressure. You are betraying this family. Valerie did not move toward the stairs to pack. Instead, she lunged toward the center of the rug. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The shock had worn off, replaced by the cornered fury of an animal realizing the cage door was locked. How dare you, she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. After everything we have done for you, we took you in. We gave you a home. We tolerated your sullen moods and your selfishness for years, and this is how you repay us? By bringing a lawyer into our living room on Christmas Eve? You are a monster, Angela. You are a cold-hearted, ungrateful monster. The guests recoiled. Aunt Sarah pressed her back against the sofa cushions. The cousins looked terrified, but I did not flinch. I did not step back. For the first time in my life, standing in that living room, I did not feel the urge to shrink or apologize. I looked at Valerie, and I saw her not as the terrifying stepmother who controlled my childhood, but as a pathetic grifter caught in a lie. Ungrateful? I repeated the word calmly. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. You keep using that word. Let us examine it. I turned to the room, addressing the audience of stunned relatives. Valerie says I am ungrateful. She says I have betrayed the family. But tell me, which family member steals the identity of another? Which family member forges a signature to saddle their stepdaughter with nearly $500,000 in debt? It was for the family, Valerie yelled, her chest heaving. We needed liquidity. We were going to pay it back. With what? I asked, my voice cutting through her hysteria. With Dad's non-existent commissions? With your credit card points? Stop lying. Valerie, you were stealing. You were stealing my equity, my credit, and my future. I started listing the numbers again, ticking them off on my fingers, firing them like bullets. $12,000 for the roof, $7,000 for the HVAC, $4,500 for the taxes, $300 a month for the utilities I have been paying for 2 years. That is over $25,000 of my own post-tax income poured into this house. And what was your contribution? Valerie? New curtains? A lease on a car you cannot afford? I made this house a home, she screeched. You made this house a crime scene, I corrected her. A real family does not view their daughter as a credit line. A real family does not treat theft as a hug. Richard stepped forward then. He looked wretched. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with red. He held his hands up in a gesture of surrender, but his words were just another attempt at manipulation. "Angela, please," he said, his voice trembling. "You have to understand the pressure I was under. The market has been terrible. I have not closed a deal in 18 months. I was drowning." He gestured vaguely toward Chloe, who was sitting on the sofa, weeping into her hands. "I just wanted to help Chloe," Richard pleaded. "She is just starting out. She needed a leg up. I thought since the house was eventually going to be yours anyway, borrowing against it now was just advancing your inheritance. I thought I had the right. I thought it was my house. Angela, I honestly thought it was my house." I looked at my father, and I felt a profound emptiness where my love for him used to be. "You thought it was your house?" I asked. "Then why did you hide the tax bills? Why did you hide the deed? You knew, Dad, you knew exactly who owned this property. You just hoped I was too stupid to find out." "It was a mistake," Richard cried. "It was a misunderstanding of the law. I am not a lawyer. Angela, I did not know it was a crime." Dana Ruiz stepped forward. She placed her hands flat on the dining table, leaning over the documents spread out there. "Ignorantia juris non excusat," Dana said. Her voice was sharp, professional, and utterly devoid of pity. "Ignorance of the law excuses no one. Mr. Sutton, you do not get to commit bank fraud and then claim you did not know the rules. You signed a document claiming to be Angela Sutton. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a deliberate act of deception." Dana picked up the loan application. "You stood in front of a notary you compromised, and you swore that this signature was authentic. You intended to take $450,000 from a federally insured bank based on a lie. In the eyes of the law, that makes you a predator, not a confused parent." "I didn't know about the signature," Chloe suddenly wailed from the couch. She looked up, mascara running down her cheeks, her eyes wide and imploring. "I didn't know. They just told me they had money. I am innocent. Angela, you can't kick me out. I had nothing to do with this." For a second, the room wavered. Chloe was good at playing the victim. She looked young and helpless. Aunt Sarah looked like she wanted to go comfort her. I did not let that happen. "You didn't know?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous chill. "Are you sure about that, Chloe?" "I swear," Chloe sobbed. "I thought Dad just saved the money." I picked up the digital recorder from the table. I held it up. "Shall I play the rest of the tape?" I asked. "Because there is a section from Tuesday night where you ask Mom specifically about the loan." Chloe froze. Her sobbing stopped instantly. I pressed the button. The audio was grainy but clear enough. Chloe's voice. "But Mom, what if Angela sees the bank statement? Won't she freak out that there is a lien?" Valerie's voice. "She won't see it. I have the mail forwarded to a P.O. box starting January. By the time she notices, we will have the cash." Chloe's voice. "Okay, good, because I really need that deposit by the 1st. The realtor says he won't hold the loft without it." I clicked the recorder off. The silence in the room was heavier than before. Chloe's defense had evaporated. She wasn't an innocent bystander. She was a co-conspirator who was worried about getting caught, not about the morality of stealing from her sister. "You knew," I said, looking at Chloe with disgust. "You knew the money was coming from a loan on my house. You knew they were hiding the mail from me. You didn't care where the money came from. As long as you got your loft, you are just as guilty as they are." Chloe shrank back into the cushions, her face pale. She said nothing. Then, Grandma Margaret spoke. She had been watching the exchange silently, her hands resting on her cane. Now, she turned her head slowly to look at my father. "Richard," she said. It was just his name, but the way she said it made him flinch. "Mother Sutton," Richard whispered, "I am sorry." "Do not apologize to me," Margaret said. "I am old. I have seen enough scoundrels in my life, but I want to ask you one question." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his.
You are a father. Richard, you held Angela when she was a baby. You promised my daughter, on her deathbed, that you would take care of her.
Margaret's voice shook slightly, but not from age, from rage. So tell me, son, when did you become okay with it? When did you look at your own flesh and blood and decide that she was not a person, but a resource to be harvested? When did you decide that it was acceptable to make your daughter a debtor so you could buy a watch and play the big man? Richard crumbled. The question stripped away his last layer of defense. He slumped against the mantelpiece, covering his face with his hands. A sob racked his body. It was a pathetic sight. A man realizing that he had sold his soul for trinkets and had been caught before he could even enjoy them.
I am sorry, he choked out. I am so sorry.
Sorry does not pay the mortgage, Dana said coldly. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out one final document. It was thick, stapled, and bore the header of the Redford Police Department. This, Dana said, placing it on the table with a slap, is a draft of a criminal complaint. It outlines 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of identity theft, and 1 count of forgery. Valerie stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. If Angela signs this document tonight, Dana explained, her tone deadly serious, I will file it with the district attorney tomorrow morning. Given the evidence, the recording, the bank files, the testimony of the notary who is already cooperating with the bank's internal investigation, you will be arrested before lunch. Bail will likely be denied given the flight risk implied by your discussion of leaving the country. Valerie's eyes went wide. Leaving the country? We were just going on a cruise. That is not how it sounds on the tape, Dana countered. I stepped forward and placed my hand on the document. My fingers were trembling, but I pressed them down flat, steadying myself against the table. I have a pen, I said, and I am ready to sign. No, Richard gasped, pushing himself off the wall. Angela, no. You can't put us in jail. We are family. Then give me a reason not to, I said. I looked at them, the 3 people who had made my life a misery for decades. Here are my terms, I said, and they are non-negotiable. I held up 3 fingers. Shah, you leave this house tonight, right now. You take only your personal items, no furniture, no electronics that were purchased in the last 2 years, no jewelry that was bought with family funds. 2, I continued, you sign a confession. Dana has it ready. You admit to the fraud. You admit that the debt is yours, not mine. You release any claim to the life estate. You agree to repay every cent I have spent on this house in the last 5 years, including the roof and the taxes. Dana will set up a payment plan. It will be garnished from your wages if necessary. And 3, I dropped my hand. You stay away from me. You stay away from Grandma. If you ever come near this property, if you ever try to contact us, if you ever try to pull a stunt like this again, I file the police report immediately. Valerie looked at the document, then at me, her face twisted. You are bluffing, she hissed. You wouldn't send your father to prison. You are too weak. She lunged. It happened fast. Valerie threw herself toward the table, her hands grasping for the police report, intending to tear it up. Valerie, no, Richard shouted. But before she could touch the paper, a hand shot out and grabbed her arm. It wasn't me. It wasn't Dana. It was Uncle Ben. My uncle, who had spent the evening drinking scotch and laughing at Richard's jokes, stood there, his grip on Valerie's arm like iron. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked sober, and he looked disgusted. That is enough, Valerie, Uncle Ben said, his voice low. Let go of me, Valerie screamed, thrashing. I need to destroy it. You are being recorded, Ben said, pointing his chin toward the corner of the room. Valerie froze. She looked. Cousin Josh was still holding his phone up. The red light of the recording indicator was steady, and behind him, 2 other cousins had their phones out too. The whole family is watching, Ben said, releasing her arm with a shove that sent her stumbling back. And frankly, Valerie, we have seen enough. You are embarrassing yourself, and you are embarrassing us. Valerie looked around the room. She looked for an ally. She looked for someone, anyone, who would buy her act. She found no one. Aunt Sarah turned her back. The cousins looked at the floor. Even Chloe had stopped crying and was staring at her mother with horror, realizing that Valerie's loss of control was sealing their fate. Valerie stood alone in the center of the wreckage she had created. Her chest heaved. She looked at the house, at the high ceilings, the crown molding, the expensive decorations she had bought to impress these very people. She realized, with a dawning horror, that it was all gone. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear. Real, primal fear. "Richard?" she whispered, turning to my father. Richard did not look at her. He was staring at the pen in my hand. He knew I would use it. He knew that the daughter he had underestimated was gone, replaced by a woman who had the power to destroy him. "We will leave," Richard croaked. "Richard!" Valerie gasped. "You can't be serious." "It is over, Valerie," Richard said, his voice breaking. "Look at them. It is over." He walked over to the table. He didn't look at me. He looked at Dana. "Where do I sign the confession?" he asked. Dana pushed a separate document toward him. "Right here, and initial the bottom of each page." Richard picked up the pen. His hand shook so badly he could barely form the letters. He signed. Then he handed the pen to Valerie. "Sign it," he told her. "I won't," she spat. "Sign it," Richard roared, a sudden burst of anger that made everyone jump. "Or so help me God. Valerie, I will drive myself to the police station and turn you in myself." Valerie flinched. She looked at the man she had controlled for 20 years and realized the strings had finally snapped. She took the pen. She scratched her signature onto the paper. It was the same handwriting I had seen on the forged loan application. The same loopy S, the same slant. Proof, one last time, of her guilt. "Get out," I said quietly when they were done. "We need time to pack," Valerie whined. "You have 50 minutes left," I said, checking my watch. "I suggest you hurry." They moved then. It was a shuffle of defeat. Richard, Valerie, and Chloe walked toward the stairs. They looked small. They looked stripped of all the pretension and arrogance that had filled the room only an hour ago. The guests parted to let them through, like the Red Sea, careful not to touch them. When they disappeared upstairs, the silence in the living room was deafening. I looked at the table. The confession was signed. The police report was unsigned, but ready. The recorder was off. I looked at Grandma Margaret. She gave me a tired, triumphant smile. "This is my house," I said to the room, my voice shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. I looked at Uncle Ben, at Aunt Sarah, at the cousins. "I am sorry to ruin the party," I said. "But this is my house. I am not the guest. I am not the daughter who lives here rent-free. I am the owner. And from now on, anyone who steps through that door treats me with respect, or they don't come in." "You did the right thing, Angela," Uncle Ben said quietly. We didn't know. We truly didn't know." "You didn't look," I said. "But you saw tonight." I sat down in the chair opposite Grandma. I felt exhausted, hollowed out, but incredibly light. The weight of 20 years of abuse had been lifted. Upstairs, I could hear the sound of suitcases being dragged across the floor. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. "Merry Christmas, Angela," Dana said, closing her briefcase with a solid snap. "Merry Christmas," I whispered. I looked at the tree. It was still beautiful, but for the first time, it didn't belong to Valerie. It was mine. The sound of suitcases bumping against the banister was a clumsy, rhythmic thud that echoed through the silent house. It was 9:20 at night. They had used 45 minutes of their hour. I stood by the front door, my arms crossed, watching them descend. Valerie came first. She was wearing her fur coat, the one she claimed was vintage, but I knew was bought on credit last winter, and dragging a Louis Vuitton carry-on that looked absurdly small for a woman who was losing her entire life. Her mascara was smeared, dark streaks cutting through the heavy foundation she wore like armor. She refused to look at anyone. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor. her jaw set in a rigid line of suppressed rage. Behind her came Richard. My father looked 10 years older than he had when the party started. He was carrying 2 large duffel bags. His shoulders slumped so low it looked like his spine had collapsed. He was wearing the Rolex watch on his wrist, but he kept pulling his sleeve down to cover it, as if the metal burned his skin. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the living room, at the tree, at the guests, at the life he had built on a foundation of lies. He looked at me, and his mouth opened slightly, perhaps to say goodbye, perhaps to beg one last time. I met his gaze with a flat, impenetrable stare, and he closed his mouth, looking away in shame. Chloe brought up the rear. She was not carrying luggage. She was carrying a laundry basket filled with clothes and beauty products. Clutching her phone in her other hand, she was still crying. Soft, hiccuping sobs that were meant to elicit sympathy. She paused at the landing, looking at Aunt Sarah, hoping for a reprieve, hoping someone would jump up and say, "Stop, this is too cruel." But no one moved. The guests stood like statues. They had seen the evidence. They had heard the recording. They knew that the tears were not for the crime, but for the punishment. They gathered in the foyer, a huddled mass of defeat. The cold air from the drafty doorframe was already seeping in, a preview of the world awaiting them outside. "We are leaving," Richard muttered, his voice cracking. We will stay at the motel off the highway tonight." "I do not care where you stay," I said calmly, "just as long as it is not here." Valerie gripped the handle of her suitcase until her knuckles turned white. She looked up at me, and for a second, the old venom flared in her eyes. She wanted to scream. She wanted to curse me. She wanted to burn the house down rather than let me have it. "You think you have won," she whispered, her voice trembling with hate. "But you will never be happy. Angela, you are cold. You are just like that old witch in the chair. You will die alone in this big, empty house." "I would rather be alone in a house I own," I replied, "than be surrounded by people who steal from me." I reached for the door handle to usher them out. "Wait." The single word cut through the tension like a blade. Grandma Margaret was standing by the entrance to the living room. She had walked over, leaning on her cane, her movement slow but deliberate. She stopped 10 feet away from them. "Before you go," Margaret said, her voice surprisingly strong, "there is one last thing." She reached into the pocket of her navy blazer and pulled out a thin, cream-colored envelope. It was not a legal document from Dana's briefcase. It was small, delicate, the kind of envelope you would use for a thank you note or a holiday greeting. She held it out to me. "Angela," she said, "Merry Christmas." I looked at the envelope. For a moment, I hesitated. I thought it was just a card, a sentimental gesture to mark the occasion. I took it from her hand. It felt light. "Open it," Margaret commanded, looking straight at Richard. I tore the flap open. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper, folded into thirds. I unfolded it. It wasn't a card. It was a notarized document, dated 3 days ago. I scanned the text. It was an amendment to the trust, a power of appointment. I, Margaret Sutton, grantor, hereby designate Angela Sutton as the sole trustee with immediate effect, granting her unilateral authority to manage, sell, or occupy the property at 42 Maple Drive. Removing Richard Sutton from any administrative capacity effective immediately. I looked up, stunned. This wasn't just about ownership. This was about control. This document meant that even before the fraud investigation concluded, even before the court dates, I was legally the boss. I didn't just own the walls. I owned the decisions. Margaret looked at the 3 people standing by the door. She raised her chin, her eyes flashing with a fierce, protective light. "I tried," she said, her voice loud enough for every person in the house to hear. "I tried to give you time, Richard. I tried to hope that you would find your moral compass, but a compass does not work when you are standing in a magnet field of greed." She looked at Valerie, then at Chloe. "I cannot teach you kindness at this age," Margaret said, her tone final. I cannot teach you integrity. Those ships sailed a long time ago. But I can choose who I leave my legacy to. I can choose who protects the history of this family. She pointed a shaking finger at me. I choose Angela. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. I choose Angela. It was the validation I had waited 32 years to hear. Not just that I was right, or that I was the legal owner, but that I was chosen, that I was seen. Valerie's face twisted. She took a step forward, her mouth opening to unleash one final stream of poison. She looked ready to spit on the floor, ready to scream every obscenity she knew. But then, her eyes flicked to the side. She saw me. I wasn't flinching. I was standing tall, holding the paper Margaret had given me. My expression was cold, hard, and utterly unafraid, and behind me, on the entry table, the small green light of the digital voice recorder was blinking. I hadn't turned it back on, but she didn't know that. She looked at the recorder, she looked at my face, she looked at Dana Ruiz, who was standing in the living room doorway with her arms crossed, watching like a sentinel. Valerie swallowed. The words died in her throat. She realized that any word she spoke now would just be another line in the court transcript. She realized she had lost the power to hurt me. She let out a sharp, frustrated breath, turned on her heel, and marched out into the snow without looking back. Richard lingered for a second longer. He looked at Margaret.
Mom,
He whispered. Go, Margaret said. She didn't look angry anymore. She just looked tired. Go and fix yourself, Richard, because you are not welcome here until you do. He nodded, a jerky, broken motion, and followed his wife. Chloe ran after them, her laundry basket bumping against the doorframe, crying about the cold. I stepped forward. I grabbed the heavy brass handle of the front door. I looked out into the night. The snow was falling harder now, covering their footprints almost as soon as they made them. The taillights of Richard's sedan flared red in the driveway as he started the engine. I pulled the door shut. Click. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was not a slam. It was a definitive, quiet conclusion. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door for a second. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 7 years old, the tension in my shoulders, the constant, low-level hum of anxiety that lived in my gut whenever Valerie was near. It just evaporated. It was gone. I turned around to face the room. The atmosphere had transformed. The nervous energy was gone. The guests, my aunts, uncles, cousins, were standing there, looking a little shell-shocked, but the air felt cleaner. It felt lighter. Uncle Ben cleared his throat. He walked over to the bar and poured a glass of water. Well, he said, breaking the silence, that was necessary. Yes, I said, walking back into the living room. It was. I looked at the Christmas tree. It was still the same tree Valerie had bought to show off. But now, without her performative presence, it just looked like a tree. The lights twinkled softly. The room didn't feel like a stage set for a soap opera anymore. It felt like a living room. It felt like my living room. Donna Ruiz was at the dining table, packing up her files. She snapped her briefcase shut and looked up at me with a professional but warm smile. Do not get too comfortable yet, she warned, though her tone was kind. Tonight was the eviction. Tomorrow. The real work starts. We have to file the police report. We have to contact the credit bureaus to freeze your accounts. We have to initiate the quiet title action to formally remove the fraudulent lien, and we have to start the civil suit to recover the money for the repairs. She walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. It is going to be a long process. Angela, they might try to fight the confession. They might try to stall. It will be messy for a few months. I don't care, I said honestly. I can handle messy. I build skyscrapers. Dana, I know how to deal with a cleanup site. Good, Dana nodded. Because the law is on your side, and the evidence is bulletproof. The scales have tipped. They aren't tipping back. I looked over at the armchair. Grandma Margaret was slumped slightly, looking exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her frail again, but her eyes were shining. I walked over and knelt beside her.
"Are you okay?" I asked softly.
"I am tired," she admitted, "but it is a good tired, the kind of tired you feel after you finally take out the trash." She reached out and touched the locket around her neck, the gift Valerie had thrown on the floor, the gift I had retrieved. She ran her thumb over the silver surface.
"You know," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the house is important. Angela, it is your security, it is your inheritance, but do not make the mistake of thinking it was the prize."
"What do you mean?" I asked.
"The prize wasn't the deed," she said, looking deep into my eyes. "The gift wasn't the paper in that envelope. The real gift of tonight was watching you stand up, watching you refuse to be small, watching you look them in the eye and say no." She smiled, and it was the smile of the woman who had raised me when my own father wouldn't. "You found your voice, Angela. That is the only thing they can't ever steal from you. That is the real gift." I felt a lump in my throat. I kissed her cheek. "Thank you, Grandma." "Go on," she nudged me gently. "Go watch them leave. Make sure they are actually gone." I walked to the bay window. I pulled back the heavy velvet curtain, Valerie's curtain, and looked out. The street was dark. The snow was blanketing everything in white silence. At the end of the block, I saw the red taillights of the sedan turn the corner and disappear. They were gone. The three people who had defined my worth by my utility, who had made me feel like a guest in my own life, were gone. I looked back at the reflection in the window. I saw myself. I saw the red mark on my cheek where I had been slapped. It would bruise tomorrow. But I didn't see a victim. I didn't see the ungrateful daughter or the spinster. I saw Angela Sutton, the owner, the architect, the woman who fought back. For the first time in 32 years, I didn't feel like I had to earn my space. I didn't feel like I had to apologize for existing. "Angela," Dana called out, "I have the papers for the lock change. The locksmith is on his way, but I need you to sign the authorization." "Coming," I said. I turned away from the window. I walked back into the warmth of the living room. I pulled a chair up to the dining table, right next to Grandma and Dana. I sat down under the warm glow of the chandelier. Dana spread the documents out on the mahogany table. Authorization for locksmith services, affidavit of identity theft, petition for restraining order. They were just papers, but they were also bricks. I was laying the foundation for a new life. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. I didn't hesitate. I pressed the tip to the paper and began to write. Angela Sutton. The ink flowed dark and permanent. The story of the victim was over. The story of the owner had just begun. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed seeing justice served as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your car, your kitchen, or maybe your own cozy living room? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading your stories, and if you want more satisfying tales of revenge and justice, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need a reminder to stand up for themselves. See you in the next one.